Hey guys, tonight we're diving into one of the most devastating periods in European history, the Little Ice Age, a centuries-long climate disaster that slowly but surely destroyed the medieval world as people knew it. This is the story of failing harvests, frozen rivers, and entire civilizations that simply couldn't survive when the earth itself turned cold and unforgiving. We're talking about a time when the weather didn't just change the seasons, it changed the course of human history forever. Before we begin this chilling journey through time, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely find these stories as fascinating as I do. And let me know in the comments where you're listening from tonight and what the weather's like in your part of the world. It's always interesting to see how our modern climate compares to what people faced back then. Now go ahead and get comfortable. Maybe grab an extra blanket since we'll be talking about some very cold centuries ahead. Dim those lights, and let's settle in together as we explore how a few degrees of temperature change brought down an entire way of life. Imagine you live in Europe in the year 1315. You wake up in your small house made of wood and mud. The first thing you hear is rain. It's been raining for weeks now, and it just won't stop. This isn't normal rain. This is cold, heavy rain that falls every single day. The sky is always grey and cloudy. You haven't seen the sun in so long that you've almost forgotten what it looks like. Your father is a farmer, just like most people back then. He grows wheat and barley in the fields around your village. But something terrible is happening. The rain is flooding all the fields. The grain that's supposed to feed your family and your neighbours is rotting in the ground. For hundreds of years before this, the weather had been pretty good. People call that time the medieval warm period. It was warm enough to grow grapes in England and for Vikings to sail to far-off places like Greenland. But now, everything is changing. Your village has about 200 people in it. Everyone knows everyone else. There's the blacksmith who makes horseshoes and tools. There's the baker who makes bread when there's grain to bake with. There's the priest who prays for good weather every Sunday. And there are lots of farmers like your father. The rain started in the spring, right when farmers were supposed to plant their seeds. Your father planted anyway, hoping the weather would get better. He scattered barley seeds in the muddy field behind your house, but the seeds just sat in the cold, wet mud. Some washed away. Others started to grow, but then rotted because there was too much water. Your mother tries to keep everyone cheerful. She tells stories at night by the small fire in your house, but you can see she's worried. The grain from last year is running low. Your family usually has enough food stored up to last until the new harvest, but the new harvest isn't coming. In the next village over, things are even worse. A merchant who travels between villages told your father that some farmers there didn't plant anything at all. They knew it was hopeless. Instead, they're trying to catch fish in the swollen rivers or hunt for rabbits in the forest. Your stomach grumbles as you think about food. Yesterday, your mother made a thin soup with just a few vegetables and some old bread. She said it was a feast, but you could tell she was trying to make the best of things. The village miller is in trouble too. His mill grinds grain into flour, so the baker can make bread, but there's no grain to grind. The millstone sits silent while the river rushes by, too strong and angry from all the rain. The miller just sits and watches the water flow past his useless mill wheel. Some people in the village are starting to get desperate. Old Thomas, who lives alone in a hut near the woods, was caught stealing eggs from his neighbour's chickens. He said he was so hungry he couldn't help himself. The village leader made him apologise, but everyone understood why he did it. The worst part is that nobody knows when it will end. Will the rain keep falling forever? Will the sun ever come back? Your father talks quietly with the other farmers late at night, and you catch bits of their worried conversations. But here's what you don't know yet, what nobody in your village knows. This is just the beginning. This rain, this terrible, endless rain, is the start of something much bigger and more frightening than anyone can imagine. What started as a bad growing season will become the worst famine in European history, and by the time it's over, millions of people will be dead. It's now 1316, and you're 1 year older and much, much thinner. The rain finally stopped, but summer was cold and wet. The harvest failed completely. Where golden fields of wheat used to wave in the breeze, there are only muddy patches with rotting stalks. Your family's food ran out 3 months ago. Now you eat things you never thought were food before. Your mother makes soup from tree bark. She boils it for hours to make it soft enough to swallow. It tastes like nothing, but at least it fills your belly for a little while. The baker's shop has been closed for months. There's no grain to make bread. The baker himself looks like a skeleton. His ribs show through his shirt, and his eyes have sunk deep into his face. He spends his days searching for acorns in the forest, just like you do. Some families have made hard choices. The Johnson family, who lived 3 houses down from you, they left in the middle of the night. Nobody knows where they went. Maybe they went south, hoping to find food there. Their house stands empty now, with the door hanging open and weeds growing through the floor. People are eating grass. Yes, grass, like cows do. But human stomachs can't digest grass properly, so it just makes people sick. Still, when you're starving, you'll try anything. You've seen children sitting in fields, chewing on dandelions and clover, their faces green from the plant juice. The village priest has gotten very thin too. Every Sunday, he prays for God to send food, but his voice is weak now, and fewer people come to church. Some have died, others are too weak to walk, and some people are angry at God for letting this happen. Your father sold your family's cow last month. A traveling merchant gave him 3 silver coins for Bessie. The cow was skinny too, but the merchant said he could get a good price for her in the city. Your father cried that night. Bessie had been with your family since before you were born. The worst part is watching the little children. There's a baby in the village who doesn't cry anymore. Babies are supposed to cry, but this one is too weak. Its mother has no milk to feed it because she's starving too. The baby just lies there, quiet and still, with big sad eyes. People have started eating things that would make you sick in normal times. Rats, for example. Your neighbor caught a rat in his house and roasted it over his fire. He shared tiny pieces with his family, and they ate every bit, even crunching the small bones. Some folks have gotten mean and selfish. Last week, someone broke into the church and stole the candles. Not because they needed light, but because candles are made from animal fat, and you can eat fat. The priest was heartbroken, but he understood. Hunger makes people do terrible things, but other people have become kinder. Mrs. Henderson, an old widow who used to be grumpy, now shares everything. She finds with the neighbor children. When she discovered a handful of old turnips in her cellar, she cut them into tiny pieces and gave them to anyone who was hungry. The roads are full of people walking. Where are they going? Anywhere that might have food. Whole families pack up their few belongings and start walking toward the nearest city. But the cities are in trouble too. There are too many hungry people and not enough food for anyone. You've learned to walk more slowly now. Fast movements make you dizzy because your body doesn't have enough energy. Your clothes hang loose on your body. Your mother has to use rope to keep your pants from falling down. At night, your family huddles together for warmth. You talk about food, not because you have any, but because remembering good meals somehow makes you feel a little better. Your father tells stories about harvest festivals from when he was young, when there was so much food that people couldn't eat it all. The strange thing is, people are still trying to live normal lives. The blacksmith still works, even though nobody can afford to hire him. The teacher still tries to hold lessons, even though half the children are gone. Life goes on, sort of, even in the middle of disaster. But you're about to learn something that will shock you. This famine isn't just affecting your village, or even your country. It's happening everywhere. From England to Poland, from Norway to Italy, millions of people are starving. And the worst part, some people are so desperate that they're starting to do things that humans should never do. Things that will change how people think about hunger forever. It's 1317 now, and you're starting your 3rd year of hunger. You've learned to ignore the constant ache in your stomach. Your body has gotten used to being empty. You move like an old person, even though you're still young. Every step takes effort. The village is much smaller now. Half the houses are empty. Some families died. Others just packed up and left, hoping to find food somewhere else. The ones who stayed are the ones too weak to travel or too stubborn to give up on their homes. Your father found something terrible in the woods last week. He came home with a scared look on his face and whispered to your mother in the corner. You heard some of what he said. Bones and human and picked clean. Someone in your peaceful village had done something that nobody talks about, but everyone now fears. People are eating things that people should never eat. Tree bark soup isn't enough anymore. Folks are boiling leather shoes to make broth. They're eating clay and dirt, hoping it will stop the hunger pains. Your neighbor ate a candle last week and got very sick, but he said it was worth it, just to have something in his belly. The traveling merchants who used to come through your village have stopped coming. There's nothing to trade for. And the roads are dangerous now. Starving people will attack anyone who looks like they might have food. Even a single crust of bread is worth fighting for. Your mother has started talking about going to live with your aunt in a city far away. But your father shakes his head. He heard that the cities are even worse. Too many people, not enough food, and diseases spreading because people are too weak to fight off sickness. There are strange stories going around, tales that people don't want to believe but keep hearing anyway. Stories about families who disappeared and were never seen again. Stories about meat being sold in distant markets that didn't come from cows or pigs. Stories about people who survived when all their neighbors died, and nobody asks too many questions about how. Your village priest tries to keep people hopeful, but even he is struggling. During his last sermon, he talked about how God tests people's faith. But his voice cracked, and you could see he was having doubts too. Some people whispered that if God loved them, he wouldn't let children starve. The strangest thing is how normal some things still seem. Birds still sing in the morning. The sun still comes up every day. Flowers still bloom in spring. Nature doesn't seem to care that humans are suffering. Life goes on for everything except people. You've seen grown men cry over a handful of grain. You've watched mothers give their last bit of food to their children and then pretend they're not hungry. You've seen people pray to saints they never believed in before, begging for help that never comes. But some people found ways to survive that others couldn't. Families who lived near rivers could catch fish sometimes. People who knew about wild plants and mushrooms had better luck finding food in the forests. Those who had strong friendships helped each other and shared whatever they found. By 1318, things started to get a tiny bit better. The weather improved just enough for some small harvests. It wasn't much, but it was something. People began to hope again, but the damage was done. Europe had lost millions of people. Entire villages had disappeared from maps. The Great Famine didn't just kill people from hunger. It made them weak enough to die from diseases that they normally could have fought off. It broke apart families and communities. It changed how people thought about food, about their neighbors, and about whether they could trust in good times ever coming back. When you finally got older and had children of your own, you never let them waste food. You saved every crumb. You always kept extra grain stored away, just in case. And sometimes, on quiet nights, you would tell them about the years when it rained too much and nearly everyone died. The Little Ice Age had just begun, and this famine was its first great blow to medieval life. But it wouldn't be the last. The cold was just getting started, and it would spend the next few centuries slowly destroying the world that people had built during the warmer times. The medieval way of life, with its faith in good harvests and stable weather, had been shattered. People learned that nature could turn cruel without warning, and that even the strongest societies could collapse when the weather changed. This lesson would echo through the centuries, reminding everyone that humans are still at the mercy of forces much bigger than themselves. Picture yourself in England in the year 1100. You're standing in a beautiful vineyard on a sunny hillside in Kent. The green leaves of grapevines stretch out before you, heavy with dark purple grapes ready for harvest. You can smell the sweet scent of ripe fruit in the warm air. This might surprise you, but you're looking at one of the best wine regions in all of Europe. Yes, England used to make wine. Not just a little bit for special occasions, but lots of it. English wine was so good that even the French bought it. There were vineyards all over southern England, and even some in the north where it's too cold to grow grapes today. Your father is a vineyard worker on this estate that belongs to a monastery. Monks were some of the best winemakers in medieval times. They had the time and knowledge to care for the vines properly. Brother Thomas, the head monk in charge of wine, knows everything about when to plant, when to prune the vines, and when to pick the grapes. The weather has been perfect for growing grapes for as long as anyone can remember. Summers are warm and long. Even winters aren't too harsh. This good weather has been going on for hundreds of years. Historians will later call this time the medieval warm period, but you just think of it as normal weather. Today is harvest day. Everyone in the nearby village comes to help pick grapes. It's hard work, but fun too. People sing songs as they work. Children run between the rows of vines, eating grapes until their bellies are full. The older folks tell stories about harvests from years past, when the grapes were so sweet they practically turned into wine on the vine. Your basket is almost full of grapes. Each cluster is fat and juicy. You pop one in your mouth and it bursts with sweetness. These grapes will make wine that will be traded all across Europe. English wine is famous for being smooth and delicious. The vineyard covers several hills around the monastery. Brother Thomas says they make enough wine here to fill thousands of barrels every year. Some goes to the monastery for the monks to drink with their meals. Some gets sold to merchants who take it to London and other big cities. And some even gets shipped across the sea to France and Germany. You've never been to France, but your uncle, who works as a merchant sailor, says French people are surprised when they taste English wine. They expect it to be terrible because England is so far north. But when they try it, they're shocked at how good it is. Some French nobles even prefer English wine to their own. The tools you use are simple but effective. Sharp knives to cut the grape clusters from the vines. Wooden baskets to carry the grapes. Later, you'll help pour the grapes into big wooden vats where people will stomp on them with bare feet to squeeze out the juice. Brother Thomas points to the far hills and tells you that 60 years ago, those hills were covered with grapevines, too. We had twice as much land for grapes then, he says. The harvest was so good we didn't know what to do with all the wine. But recently, some of those distant vineyards haven't been producing as well. The nights have been getting a bit cooler, and the growing season seems shorter. Other vineyard workers are starting to arrive. There's old William, who's been doing this for 50 years. There's Mary and her 3 daughters, who can pick grapes faster than anyone. There's young Peter, who dreams of becoming a monk and learning the secrets of winemaking. The monastery keeps detailed records of every harvest. Brother Thomas shows you a thick book where monks have written down how much wine they made each year, what the weather was like, and how good the grapes were. The numbers have been pretty steady for decades, but lately they've been going down just a little bit each year. You don't know it yet, but you're living at the end of an era. The warm weather that made English wine possible is slowly changing. Each year, summer is getting just a tiny bit shorter. Winters are lasting a little longer. The changes are so small that most people don't notice them yet. As you work in the warm sunshine, filling your basket with perfect grapes, you can't imagine that someday this vineyard will be gone. You can't picture these hills covered with grass instead of grapevines. You don't know that your grandchildren will grow up in an England where wine is something that only comes from faraway places. But the climate is shifting, and the days of English wine are numbered. What happens next will show just how much the weather controls what people can do, and how quickly things can change when the temperature drops just a few degrees. 50 years have passed, and you're now an old man working the same vineyard where you picked your first grapes as a child. But everything has changed. The hills that used to be covered with healthy green vines now look patchy and sad. Many rows of grapes have been pulled up and replaced with barley and oats. Brother Thomas, your old teacher, died 10 years ago. The new head monk, Brother William, is a practical man who doesn't smile much. He spends his time looking at the account books and shaking his head. The harvest gets smaller every year, he tells you. We barely make enough wine now to fill half our cellars. The weather has been getting stranger and colder. Summers that used to last from May through September now seem to end in August. The grapes don't have enough time to ripen properly. When you pick them, they're small and sour instead of fat and sweet like they used to be. Worst of all are the late frosts. In the old days, frost was never a problem in late spring. But now, just when the new grape buds are starting to grow, a sudden cold snap will come and kill them all. Last year, a frost in early May destroyed half the young grape shoots. The vines looked like someone had painted them black. Your own son, Thomas, works with you in the vineyard, but he's already talking about leaving to become a grain farmer instead. There's no future in grapes anymore, Father, he tells you. Every year we work harder and get less wine. I have a family to feed. The monastery has started growing other crops between the grapevines. Where once there were only grapes as far as you could see, now there are patches of wheat, barley, and vegetables. Brother William says they need food more than wine. The monks still try to make wine, but it's not very good anymore. You remember, the wine from your youth. It was golden and tasted like sunshine and honey. The wine you make now is thin and bitter. Even the monks don't enjoy drinking it much. They've started buying wine from France instead, which costs a lot more money, but tastes much better. The other workers are getting old like you, and young people don't want to learn the wine business anymore. Why spend years learning to care for grapes when the grapes keep failing? Your nephew joined a group of merchants who trade wool with other countries. Sheep don't care about the weather as much as grapes do, he jokes. Some of the other monasteries have given up on wine completely. Brother William received a letter from a monastery up north saying they pulled up all their vines. Last autumn, "We're going to raise cattle instead," their letter said. "At least cows don't freeze to death when it gets cold. You've noticed that birds don't come to eat the grapes like they used to. That's because there aren't as many grapes to eat. The few grapes that do grow are usually too sour for the birds to want. Even the animals seem to know that something has changed." The worst part is talking to merchants who remember the old days. A wine trader from London visited last month. He's an old man now, but he told you stories about when he was young. "English wine used to be famous all over Europe," he said sadly. "Now nobody even asks for it anymore. They want French wine or wine from warmer places." The temperature change isn't huge, maybe just a degree or two colder on average than it used to be. But for grapes, that tiny difference means everything. Grapes need warm days and cool nights for exactly the right amount of time. If the growing season is even a little bit shorter, the grapes can't get sweet enough to make good wine. Brother William has been talking about selling the vineyard land to local farmers who want to grow grains. "We need to be realistic," he tells the other monks. "God is telling us to change with the times, but you can see that even he feels sad about giving up a tradition that's been going on for hundreds of years. Young people in the village don't even know that England used to be famous for wine. To them, wine has always been something that comes from France or other faraway places. They think it's strange when old folks like you talk about the days when every hill around here was covered with grapevines. You still tend the remaining vines as carefully as you can, but your heart isn't in it like it used to be. Each spring, you hope this will be the year the warm weather returns for good. But each fall, the harvest is smaller, and the wine is worse. What you don't know is that this is still just the beginning. The cold that's destroying your grapevines is going to get much worse. The Little Ice Age is just getting started, and soon it will change not just English vineyards, but the whole way people live across Europe and beyond. It's now 1300, and you're watching your grandson help pull up the last grapevines on what was once England's most famous vineyard. Your back is too bent with age to do the heavy work anymore, but you wanted to be here for this final day. The monastery has decided to turn all the vineyard land into fields for growing grain. Brother William, now an old man himself, stands beside you. He's holding a small bottle of wine from the last harvest 3 years ago. It's not very good wine, thin and sour, but it represents the end of 700 years of English winemaking. My grandfather's grandfather planted the first vines on this hill, you tell your grandson, but he just nods politely. He's more interested in learning about raising sheep and growing barley. To him, Grapevines are just old plants that don't work anymore. The few remaining grapevines look sad and scraggly. Their leaves are smaller than they used to be, and they never produced enough grapes to bother harvesting in recent years. Some vines have brown patches where frost killed parts of them spring after spring. Others just stopped growing new shoots altogether. 3 workers with picks and shovels are digging up the vine roots. It's hard work because some of these vines have been growing in the same spot for over 200 years. Their roots go deep into the hill, but Brother William insisted that every root be dug up so the land can be used properly for grain. You remember when this work would have taken dozens of people several days to finish. But now there are only 3 workers total, and they'll be done by evening. That's how few vines are left. Most of the hillside has already been converted to fields of barley and oats. The church records show that the last good wine harvest was in 1288, 12 years ago. After that, the monastery tried for a few more years, but the summers kept getting shorter and cooler. Brother William showed you the numbers in the account books. The amount of wine produced went from 1,000 barrels per year to 500, then to 100, then to almost nothing. A merchant passing through the village stopped to watch the work. He told you that all the vineyards in northern England are gone now. Even the ones in the south are struggling. Nobody in England makes wine worth drinking anymore, he said. It's all French wine now, or from even warmer places like Spain. Your grandson finds something interesting as he helps dig up an old vine. It's a piece of pottery with writing on it. Brother William looks at it and says it's from 1156, when the monks first expanded this vineyard during a particularly good year. That was almost 150 years ago, when summers were long and warm and wine flowed like water. The saddest thing is that nobody even mourns the end of English wine. To most people, it just seems natural. Of course, wine comes from warm places. That makes sense. They've forgotten that England was once warm enough to compete with the best wine regions in France. Brother William tells you they're going to save one last bottle of wine in the monastery's treasury. Someday, people might not believe that we ever made wine here, he says. This bottle will prove that we did. You doubt anyone will be interested in tasting wine that's hundreds of years old, but you understand why he wants to save it. As the Frai workers pull up the last vine, you notice something in the soil. The roots have left dark marks in the earth where they've been growing all these years. Those marks will disappear soon when farmers start ploughing the ground for grain. Then there will be no trace left that grapes ever grew here. The temperature has only dropped by about 3 degrees since your childhood. That doesn't sound like much, but it was enough to completely change what could grow in English soil. The growing season became too short. Frost came too early in the fall and too late in the spring. The grapes couldn't ripen properly anymore. Your grandson asks why people don't just move the vineyards further south where it's warmer. You explain that the good land in the south is already being used for other crops that are more reliable than grapes. Besides, even the south of England is getting colder. Soon, growing grapes anywhere in England will be impossible. As you walk home from the hillside for the last time, you look back at the bare earth where grapes once grew. Wildflowers and grass will grow there next spring. After that, farmers will plant barley that can handle the cooler weather. The hill will still be beautiful, but it will never again produce the golden wine that once made this little corner of England famous across Europe. The end of English wine wasn't dramatic. There was no single catastrophic year when all the vines died at once. Instead, it was a slow fade. Harvests getting smaller, wine getting worse, until finally it wasn't worth the effort anymore. The Little Ice Age had claimed its first major casualty in the slow war against the medieval way of life. And this was just the beginning. What happened to England's vineyards would soon happen to many other things that people had taken for granted during the warm centuries. The cold was patient, but it was also relentless. You're standing on the deck of a wooden Viking ship in the year 985, watching a green coastline come into view. The salty wind fills the ship's big square sail as your father, Eric the Red, points toward the land ahead. There it is, he says with pride in his voice. Greenland, our new home. Your father didn't choose this name by accident. When he first discovered this land 3 years ago, he called it Greenland instead of Iceland, where you came from, because he wanted people to think it was a nice place to live. And you know what? He wasn't lying. The southern coast really is green. As your ship gets closer to shore, you can see grass growing on the hillsides. There are flowers blooming near the beach. It looks almost like the fjords back in Norway, just a bit cooler. Your father has convinced 25 families to sail here with him to start a new settlement. Everyone is excited to begin farming on this fresh land. The ship is packed with everything needed to start a new life. You have cows, sheep, and goats in wooden pens on the deck. There are barrels full of grain seeds, tools for farming, and even some chickens. Your mother has brought her spinning wheel to make wool into cloth. Your little sister clutches her favorite doll made from sheep's wool. Your father explains that Greenland has 2 good areas for settling. The eastern settlement, where you're heading first, and the western settlement further up the coast. Both places have protected fjords where ships can anchor safely, and valleys with enough grass to feed livestock. When you finally step onto the rocky beach, the first thing you notice is how quiet it is. There are no other people here. No towns, no farms, nothing. Just endless empty land waiting for someone to claim it. Your father says this means you can pick the best spots for your farm without having to fight anyone for it. The summer weather is actually quite pleasant. Sure, it's cooler than back in Norway, but the grass grows well and there's enough rain to keep everything green. The older men in your group start walking up from the beach to look for the best place to build houses. They want spots protected from the wind, but with good views of the fjord. Your family claims a valley about a mile inland from the water. It has a small stream running through it that will never freeze completely, even in winter. The slopes are gentle enough for sheep to graze, and there's a flat area near the stream that will be perfect for building your house. Building a house in Greenland takes time and effort. The men work together to cut turf, thick chunks of grass and dirt, that they stack up to make walls. The turf keeps the house warm in winter and cool in summer. Your house will have thick stone walls at the base with turf piled on top. The roof will be made of wood covered with more turf. While the men build houses, the women and children start gardens. Your mother plants cabbage, onions, and barley in the rich soil near your new home. She's happy to find that vegetables grow well here. The growing season is shorter than in Norway, but it's long enough to raise most of the crops your family needs. The cows and sheep seem to like Greenland too. They wander around the valley eating the thick grass. The cows give plenty of milk, which your mother turns into cheese and butter. The sheep grow thick wool that will be useful for making warm clothes for the cold winters. By the end of your first summer, the eastern settlement has 15 farms spread around the fjord. Each family has built a house, planted crops, and started raising animals. Children run and play between the farms while adults share tools and help each other with big jobs like building barns. Your father decides to explore more of Greenland. He takes the ship and a few men to sail further west along the coast. When he comes back, he's excited about what he found. There's another fjord system perfect for farming, he tells everyone. We could probably settle 100 families there. As autumn arrives, you help gather hay to feed the animals during winter. Everyone works together to cut grass with long scythe tools and pile it into big haystacks. The hay smells sweet and will keep the cows and sheep fed when snow covers the ground. The first winter in Greenland is long and cold, but not unbearable. Your family stays warm in the turf house. You eat cheese, dried fish, and vegetables from the garden. Sometimes your father goes hunting for seals or Arctic foxes. The fur keeps you warm, and the meat tastes pretty good when your mother cooks it with onions. What you don't know yet is that you've arrived during some of the warmest years Greenland will see for the next 500 years. The good weather that made your father's decision seem so smart is about to change. The little ice age is coming, and when it does, it will slowly squeeze the life out of your new home. It's 1200 now, and you're the grandson of that first settler, who came with Eric the Red. You've spent your whole life in Greenland, but lately, you've been wondering if your children will be able to do the same. Something is changing about this land, something that makes farming harder each year. Your grandfather used to tell stories about the early days when grass grew thick and green, and summer lasted long enough to harvest grain. But those days seem to be getting rarer. This summer, frost came in early August and killed half the barley crop before it was ready to harvest. The eastern settlement now has about 2,000 people living in farms scattered around the fjords. There's even a small wooden church where a priest from Norway holds services. Your community feels like a real place now, not just an experiment. But everyone is starting to worry about the changing weather. Your cattle used to stay outside most of the year, munching on grass that grew almost everywhere. Now you have to keep them in barns much longer because the grass doesn't grow as thick as it used to. You spend more time cutting hay and trying to store enough to feed the animals through winters that seem to last longer each year. The western settlement, where your cousin lives, is having even more trouble. It's further north and colder there. Last winter, 3 families had to kill their cows because they didn't have enough hay to feed them. Without cows, those families have no milk, no cheese, and no butter. They're talking about moving back to the eastern settlement, or maybe even back to Norway. Your father shows you records he keeps of each year's harvest. The numbers tell a clear story that nobody wants to admit. 20 years ago, your farm produced enough grain to feed your family and have some left over to trade. Now you barely grow enough to get through the winter, and some years you don't grow any grain at all. The ice in the fjords is staying longer each spring. Your grandfather said the ice used to melt by April, but now it often lasts until May or even June. This means ships from Norway and Iceland can't reach you as early as they used to. Sometimes they can't come at all if the ice doesn't clear in time. Trade with the outside world is becoming more difficult and expensive. When ships do manage to reach Greenland, they charge higher prices for things like iron tools, wheat flour, and wood. The ship captains say the trip is riskier now because of all the sea ice, so they want more money to make it worth the danger. Your community has had to become more creative about surviving. People are eating more seal meat and fish because they're more reliable than crops. Your wife has learned to make soup from seaweed that washes up on the beach. It doesn't taste very good, but it helps fill empty stomachs when the stored grain runs low. Some families have started hunting caribou in the interior of Greenland. It's dangerous work because the weather can change suddenly, trapping hunters in blizzards. But caribou meat lasts a long time when dried properly, and the hides make warm clothing that's better than wool for staying warm in the increasingly cold weather. The young people in the settlement are divided about what to do. Some want to stay and fight against the changing climate. They say Greenland is their home, and they won't give up on it. Others think it's time to leave while they still can. They've heard that Norway is still warm enough for good farming, and there's land available for people willing to work it. Your neighbour, Magnus, tried growing barley in a new field last summer. He built stone walls around the field to protect the plants from wind and cold. The experiment partly worked. The barley grew better than in his old field, but it still didn't ripen properly before the early frost came. Magnus spent all that work and still lost half his crop. The church has become more important to the community as times get harder. People pray more often now, asking God to send warmer weather. The priest tries to keep everyone hopeful, but you can see in his eyes that he's worried too. He keeps talking about how suffering tests people's faith, but you wonder if God is telling you to leave this place. Your daughter, who is now 15, has never seen a truly warm summer like the ones your grandfather described. To her, short growing seasons and early frosts are normal. She doesn't understand why you seem so sad when talking about the old days. This is the only Greenland she knows. The worst part is the uncertainty. Nobody knows if next year will be better or worse than this year. You keep hoping that the warm weather will come back, that it's just a temporary change. But deep down, you're starting to suspect that the Greenland your grandfather settled is disappearing forever. You don't know it yet, but things are going to get much worse before they get better. The Little Ice Age is just getting started with Greenland. and it won't be finished until your entire civilization has vanished from this green land that's slowly turning white. It's 1450, and you are the great-great-granddaughter of that hopeful family who first sailed to Greenland with Eric the Red. But the Greenland you live in now is nothing like the land your ancestors found. The green valleys they described exist only in old stories that get sadder with each telling. You've never seen grain grow successfully in Greenland. The idea that your ancestors once harvested barley here seems like a fantasy. The growing season is now so short that even the hardiest vegetables barely have time to sprout before frost kills them. Your family survives mainly on seal meat, fish, and whatever wild plants you can gather during the brief summer. The Eastern Settlement, which once had 2,000 people spread across dozens of farms, now has fewer than 200 people clustered around. The church and the largest remaining farm. Many houses stand empty, their turf walls slowly crumbling back into the earth. Wild grass grows through the floors of abandoned homes where families once lived for generations. The Western Settlement was completely abandoned 20 years ago, when you were a child. Your father was part of the group that sailed there to check on the people. What they found was frightening. Empty houses, scattered bones of livestock, but no people anywhere. Some folks had clearly tried to sail away because the boats were gone. Others had simply vanished. Your father never liked talking about what he saw there. Your family's cows died 5 years ago during a winter that seemed to last forever. The cold started early and the fjord froze so thick that spring came 2 months late. Without grass to eat and no hay left, the cows slowly starved. Your father had to butcher them when they got too weak to stand, just to get some meat from them, before they died naturally. Now your family owns only sheep, and not many of those. Sheep can survive on tougher plants than cows, and they grow thick wool that helps them handle the cold. But even sheep struggle now. Last winter, you lost half your flock when a sudden blizzard lasted for a week. The animals couldn't find food under the deep snow and froze to death. The church is falling apart too. The wooden roof leaked so badly last year that services had to be moved to the farmhouse of Eric Magnus, the closest thing your settlement has to a leader. Brother Francis, the last priest sent from Norway, died 3 winters ago. Nobody has come to replace him. You wonder if people back in Norway even remember that Greenland exists. Ships from Norway stopped coming regularly about 30 years ago. The ones that do make it through the ice charge huge amounts for basic supplies like iron, wood, and grain. Last summer, a ship captain told your father that most people in Norway think Greenland is just a legend now, like stories about dragons or magic kingdoms. Your husband, Bjorn, talks constantly about leaving. He says, "There's nothing left for your family here except slow death." You have 2 children, a boy of 8 and a girl of 5. And Bjorn doesn't want them to grow up in a place where survival gets harder every year. He's heard that ships still sail to Iceland, and from there you could get to Norway or even Denmark. But leaving means giving up everything your family has built over centuries. Your great-great-grandfather's bones are buried in the cemetery near the church. The farmhouse where you live was built by your ancestors' hands. Every stone, every piece of turf represents years of hard work. How can you just walk away from all of that? The weather this summer has been the worst you've ever seen. It snowed in July. The few vegetables people tried to plant never even sprouted properly. The sheep spend most of their time huddled together for warmth, even during what should be the warmest time of year. Eric Magnus has been making lists of everyone left in the settlement. He says it's for planning purposes, but you suspect he's really trying to figure out who might leave and who plans to stay. There are 12 families left, down from hundreds that lived here when your grandmother was young. Your neighbour, Astrid, whose family has been in Greenland almost as long as yours, made a decision last week. She's taking her children and sailing to Iceland on the next ship that stops here. "I can't watch my children slowly starve," she told you. "At least in Iceland, they might have a chance at a normal life." The hardest part is that everyone knows this is the end, but nobody wants to say it out loud. The Greenland Norse are dying out, not from any great disaster, but from the slow squeeze of climate change. Each year brings less food, harder winters, and fewer people. Eventually, there will be nobody left at all. You hold your daughter close as you look out at the fjord, now covered with ice, even though it's only September. Part of you wants to be brave like your ancestors and stay until the very end. But another part of you thinks about your children's future. Do they deserve to inherit this struggle just because your family has been here for 500 years? You don't know it yet, but you're living through the final years of Norse Greenland. In a few decades, the last ships will sail away carrying the last people. The churches will fall silent, the farms will return to wilderness, and the great experiment of European settlement in Greenland will be over until modern times. The Little Ice Age has won this battle. It has slowly but surely made human life impossible in a place where people once thrived for centuries. But Greenland is just one victim in a larger war that the Ice Age is fighting against medieval civilization everywhere. You wake up on a freezing morning in London in the winter of 1683. As you look out your bedroom window, you can't believe what you see. The Thames River, which flows right through the heart of the city, is completely frozen solid. Not just a thin layer of ice that you could break with a stick, but thick, white ice that looks strong enough to walk on. Your father, who works as a baker near London Bridge, is already awake and getting dressed. "Come quickly," he calls to you and your brothers. This doesn't happen very often. We're going to see the Frost Fair. You bundle up in your warmest clothes, wool pants, a thick coat, and heavy boots. Your mother wraps a scarf around your neck and pulls a woolen hat down over your ears. "Stay close to your father," she warns, "and don't go near any cracks in the ice." As you and your family walk toward the river, you see that hundreds of other people have the same idea. The streets leading to the Thames are crowded with excited Londoners, all eager to see this amazing sight. Children are running ahead of their parents, shouting with glee. Even the adults seem as excited as kids. When you finally reach the riverbank, your mouth drops open. The Thames, which is usually full of boats and barges carrying goods up and down the river, is now a solid white highway. The water has frozen so hard that people are already walking across it. You can see tiny figures moving between the far shore and the near one like ants. Your father explains that this kind of freeze doesn't happen every winter. The Thames has to stay below freezing for weeks and weeks to freeze this thick. Usually, the river keeps flowing even in cold weather, because all the bridges and buildings keep the water moving. But this winter has been so cold for so long that even the moving water finally gave up and turned to ice. A merchant is trying to convince people to walk out onto the ice. "Come on!" he shouts. "It's perfectly safe! Look, there's my cart!" He points to a wooden cart sitting right in the middle of the frozen river. "If my cart can sit there, you can walk there too." Your father pays the merchant a few pennies, and your family steps carefully onto the ice. At first, it feels scary and strange. The ice is bumpy and rough in places where the water was moving when it froze. Your feet slip a little, but the ice is definitely solid enough to hold your weight. Soon, you're walking right down the middle of the Thames. It's the most amazing feeling. You're standing where boats usually sail. Fish are probably frozen underneath your feet. Looking up at London Bridge from this angle makes the city look completely different. Other people have had the same idea as your family. The ice is getting crowded with Londoners out for an adventure. Some brave souls have brought their horses and carts onto the frozen river. Children are sliding around on the ice like it's a giant playground. A few people have even brought sleds. A man with a tent has set up a little shop right on the ice. He's selling hot pies and mulled wine to keep people warm. The smell of the warm food mixes with the cold air, and your stomach starts to rumble. Your father buys you a hot pie, and you eat it while standing in the middle of the Thames. The ice makes strange noises as you walk on it. Sometimes it creaks and groans like an old wooden ship. These sounds are scary at first, but your father says it's normal. The ice is thick enough to be safe, but it's still settling and moving slightly. Just like a living thing, he says. Looking around, you realize this might be the biggest gathering of people you've ever seen in one place. The ice stretches from one side of London to the other, and it's covered with people having fun. Poor Folks and rich folks are all mixed together, slipping and sliding and laughing at themselves and each other. Some enterprising people have already set up tents and stalls on the ice. They're selling souvenirs, food, and warm drinks. A few musicians are playing songs while people dance on the frozen river. It's like someone moved a whole market onto the ice overnight. Your little brother picks up a chunk of ice and throws it, as hard as he can. It slides across the surface for what seems like forever, before finally stopping near the far shore. You and your brothers start having contests to see who can throw ice chunks the farthest. As the day goes on, more and more, people arrive at the Frost Fair. Your father says that by evening there might be thousands of people on the ice. He's heard that some people are even planning to roast a whole ox right on the frozen Thames. But as much fun as you're having, you can't help wondering about the people who depend on the river for their living. What are the boat captains doing now that their boats are trapped in solid ice? What about the fishermen who usually catch fish from boats? And how will goods get delivered to London if the river stays frozen? That night, as you lay in bed, thinking about your adventure on the frozen Thames, you don't know that this is just one small sign of something much bigger happening to the world's weather. 2 weeks have passed since the Thames first froze solid, and you can hardly remember what the river looked like with water flowing in it. The Frost Fair has grown into a whole temporary city, sitting right on top of the ice. Every day brings new tents, new shops, and new entertainments that make the frozen river the most exciting place in all of London. Your family has visited the Frost Fair 5 times now, and each time it's gotten bigger and more amazing. What started as a few brave people walking carefully on the ice has turned into streets and avenues marked out with flags and ropes. People have even given names to the pathways across the frozen Thames, just like real streets. This morning, you convince your parents to let you and your older brother go to the Frost Fair by yourselves. You're 12 now, old enough to be trusted not to fall through any cracks in the ice. Your mother packs you both hot pies and warns you to stay away from the edges where the ice might be thinner. As you walk onto the frozen river, you're amazed at what people have built in just 2 weeks. There's a whole row of printing shops set up in tents where you can buy pamphlets with your name printed on them as proof that you visited the Frost Fair. One printer is making special souvenirs that say "Printed on the River Thames, 1683" in fancy letters. A puppet show is performing near London Bridge. The puppeteer has built a little stage on the ice, and children sit cross-legged in front of it, clapping and cheering as the wooden puppets dance around. Behind them, their parents stamp their feet to keep warm while watching the show. The most amazing sight is a whole roasted ox turning on a spit right in the middle of the river. A group of butchers brought the ox out onto the ice, built a fire in a metal brazier, and started roasting it yesterday. Now they're selling slices of beef to anyone with money to buy them. The smell of roasting meat carries across the ice, making everyone hungry. Your brother wants to watch the ice bowling that some young men have set up. They're using chunks of ice as bowling balls and trying to knock down wooden pins. It's harder than regular bowling because the ice chunks slide in unpredictable directions, but that makes it more fun to watch. Near the center of the river, someone has built an ice slide that's taller than you are. Children and brave adults climb to the top and slide down on pieces of cloth or wood. Some people go so fast they tumble off their sleds at the bottom, but everyone just laughs and gets back in line. The strangest thing you see is a barber who has set up his chair and equipment right on the ice. He's giving haircuts and shaving beards in the middle of the frozen Thames. A sign next to his chair says, "Shaved on the river, a story to tell your grandchildren." Even though it's freezing cold, several men are waiting in line for this unusual service. You notice that the ice has gotten even thicker since your first visit. In some places, it's so thick that people have dug holes down into it to see how deep the freezing goes. One man shows you a hole that's deeper than a walking stick, and it still doesn't reach water. The Thames is frozen all the way down. A group of merchants has set up a proper market on the ice, selling everything from warm clothes to hot food to books and toys. They've even brought scales and weights out onto the ice to weigh goods properly. Your brother buys a small wooden carving of the frozen Thames that he can keep forever as a memory. Some enterprising people have figured out that the ice makes a perfect highway for moving heavy goods. You see carts and sleds loaded with barrels and boxes being pulled across the ice by horses. It's actually easier than using the normal roads because the ice is flat and smooth in most places. The most dangerous job on the ice belongs to the men who chop holes to check the thickness. They walk around with long poles and axes, testing different spots to make sure the ice is safe. These ice checkers wear special badges so people know to trust them. When they mark an area as unsafe, everyone stays away from it. A few brave souls have set up temporary taverns on the ice, not just tents selling drinks, but actual bars with stools and tables where people can sit and drink beer while looking out at the frozen river. The tavern keepers have to bring all their supplies across the ice every day, but business is so good that it's worth the effort. Your favorite part of the Frost Fair is the musicians. Groups of singers and players have set up at different spots across the ice. The cold air makes their instruments sound different than usual, sharper and clearer. People gather around the musicians to sing familiar songs and sometimes dance to keep warm. As the afternoon gets later, you notice that more ice chunks are appearing in the areas where the ice is thinner. Your brother points out that the ice, near the edges, has some cracks in it. Nothing dangerous yet, but it makes you remember that this magical ice city can't last forever. Walking home as the sun sets, you look back at the Frost Fair. Lanterns and torches are being lit across the ice as people prepare for an evening of entertainment. You can't imagine that someday this will all be just water again, with boats floating where people are now walking and dancing and celebrating. But that day is coming sooner than anyone realizes, and when the thaw begins, it will happen fast. It's been 6 weeks since the Thames first froze, and the Frost Fair has become a normal part of life in London. You've visited it so many times that walking on the frozen river feels as natural as walking on any street. But this morning, something is different. You wake up to the sound of water dripping from your roof. The first time you've heard that sound in over a month. Your father looks worried as he eats his breakfast. "The weather's changing," he says quietly to your mother. "I saw water on top of the ice yesterday near the bridge. And listen, do you hear that?" You all go quiet and listen. In the distance, you can hear strange creaking and groaning sounds, much louder than the normal ice noises you've gotten used to. Against your mother's wishes, your father decides to take one last trip to the Frost Fair. "I want to see what's happening," he says. "If the ice is starting to break, people need to get off it safely." Your mother makes him promise to stay near the edges and come home quickly if anything seems dangerous. As your family approaches the Thames, you immediately notice that something has changed overnight. Where the ice used to be solid white, there are now patches of dark water showing through. The area near the shore, where people usually step onto the ice, has large puddles of melted water sitting on top of the frozen surface. Most of the Frost Fair is still there, but it looks different now. Many of the tent owners are hurriedly packing up their goods, loading everything onto sleds and carts to drag back to solid ground. The man who was selling hot pies has already gone, leaving just the marks in the ice where his tent used to stand. The ice checkers are working overtime, walking around with their long poles and constantly marking new areas as unsafe. You see one of them talking urgently to a group of people near the ox roasting site. They're nodding and starting to move their equipment toward the shore. A loud crack echoes across the river, making everyone stop and look around nervously. It came from somewhere near the middle of the Thames, but you can't see exactly where. The ice checker nearest to your family shouts, "Everyone move toward the banks. The ice is starting to break up." Your father grabs your hand and your brother's hand, and your mother takes your little sister. Together, you all start walking quickly toward the shore. But it's hard to move fast on the ice, especially with so many other people doing the same thing. Everyone is trying to be careful not to slip while also hurrying to safety. As you walk, you notice that the ice under your feet feels different. It's still solid, but sometimes you can feel it move slightly when you step on it. Water is seeping up through cracks you hadn't noticed before, making the surface slippery and dangerous. Behind you, a few stubborn merchants are still trying to sell the last of their goods at cheap prices. "Everything must go!" one of them shouts. I can't carry it all back to land. But most people are more interested in getting to safety than buying souvenirs. The puppet show tent is being taken down as quickly as possible. The puppeteer is stuffing his wooden puppets into a bag while his assistant rolls up the little stage. They slip and slide on the wet ice as they hurry towards shore, but they manage to save all their equipment. Near London Bridge, you can see water flowing under the ice in some places. The ice is still thick there, but you can hear the sound of moving water underneath. A sound that's been silent for 6 weeks. It's like the Thames is waking up after a long sleep. Some foolish people are still playing games on the ice, throwing ice chunks and sliding around. But their friends are calling to them nervously, begging them to come back to land. Even the bravest people are starting to realize that the party is over. Your family reaches the shore safely, but you turn around to watch what happens next. For the rest of the day, a steady stream of people, carts and sleds moves off the ice. Some folks make multiple trips to rescue all their belongings. Others decide to abandon whatever they can't carry and just get themselves to safety. By evening, the Frost Fair is mostly empty. A few tents still stand on the ice, but their owners have given up trying to save them. As night falls, you can hear the ice making louder and louder noises, creaking, groaning, and occasionally sharp cracks that echo off the buildings on both sides of the river. The next morning, you wake up to a sound you haven't heard in weeks, the splash and gurgle of flowing water. You rush to your window and see that the Thames is a river again. Chunks of ice float downstream like white rafts. Here and there, pieces of abandoned tents and equipment from the Frost Fair drift by. Reminders of the amazing 6 weeks when London had an ice city on its river. The ice gave way so quickly that a few early risers who tried to walk on the river got soaked in cold water and had to be pulled out by their friends. But nobody was seriously hurt, and within 2 days, boats were sailing on the Thames again as if nothing had happened. Years later, when you're an adult with children of your own, you'll tell them about the winter when the Thames froze solid and London built a city on ice. They'll listen with wide eyes, hardly believing that such a thing was possible. And by then, you'll understand that what you experienced was part of something much bigger. The Little Ice Age was changing how people lived all across Europe, one frozen river at a time. You live in the small village of Millbrook in Germany in the year 1628. Your father is a farmer, and you help him work the fields around your village. But this year, like the past 3 years, something terrible has happened to the crops. The barley and rye that should be tall and golden by now are stunted and brown. Many fields have nothing growing in them at all. It's the middle of what should be summer, but the weather feels more like late autumn. Cold rain falls almost every day. When the sun does come out, it's weak and pale. Your mother has to keep a fire burning in your house even in July, just to keep everyone warm and dry. The people in your village are scared and hungry. Last year, half the families had to eat their seed grain just to survive the winter. That means they had no seeds to plant this spring. Even the families who did plant crops are watching them fail because of the cold, wet weather. Your neighbour, old Johann, stands in his field shaking his head. This isn't natural, he says to your father. Weather like this doesn't just happen by itself. Someone is making it happen. Your father nods slowly. He's starting to think the same thing. In the centre of your village stands a small wooden church where Pastor Mueller holds services every Sunday. Lately, his sermons have been about how God punishes communities that allow evil to exist among them. He reads from the Bible about droughts and famines that God sent to punish wicked people. But here's what's strange. Your community isn't wicked. The people in Millbrook work hard, go to church, and help their neighbours. So if God is punishing you with bad weather, it must be because someone in the village is doing evil things in secret. Someone must be working with the devil to ruin the crops and make everyone suffer. Your village has about 200 people living in it. Everyone knows everyone else, or at least they think they do. Families have lived here for generations, but now people are looking at their neighbours with suspicious eyes, wondering who among them might be secretly causing all this misery. The first person people started watching carefully was Greta, an old woman who lives alone in a small hut at the edge. of the village. She keeps cats, knows a lot about herbs, and sometimes mutters to herself when she thinks nobody is listening. She's always been a bit strange, but lately, people have started to wonder if her strangeness is actually something darker. Last week, when Farmer Klaus's cow got sick and died, he remembered that Greta had walked past his barn just 2 days before. He told other people about this, and they started to think, was it just a coincidence, or did Greta curse the cow by walking near it? Your mother doesn't like you playing near Greta's hut anymore. Stay away from there, she warns you. That woman might be dangerous. When you ask why, your mother can't give you a clear answer. She just says that people who live alone and act strange sometimes make bargains with evil spirits. In the next village over Millfield, something terrible happened. Last month, the villagers there decided that an old woman named Anna was a witch. They said she caused their crops to fail by making deals with the devil. A group of men tied Anna up and threw her in the river to test if she was really a witch. She drowned, which they said proved she was innocent. But by then, it was too late to save her. News of what happened in Millfield has made everyone in your village even more nervous. If Millfield had a witch, maybe Millbrook has one too. Maybe that's why your crops are failing, while you watch your stored grain run lower and lower each week. Pastor Mueller has started talking about witches during his sermons. He says that when communities suffer from unnatural weather and crop failures, it's often because Satan has sent witches to cause trouble. He urges everyone to be watchful for signs of witchcraft among their neighbors. The signs of witchcraft that Pastor Mueller describes could fit almost anyone if you think about it hard enough. Does someone have a birthmark? That could be the devil's mark. Does someone talk to animals? That could be communication with evil spirits. Does someone know how to make medicine from plants? That could be magic spells. You've started having bad dreams about Greta. In your dreams, she stands in the fields at night, doing strange dances that make the crops wither and die. You wake up feeling scared and guilty for thinking such thoughts about an old woman who has never done anything mean to you or your family. The worst part is the hunger. Your family's food supplies are running dangerously low. Your mother makes thin soup from whatever she can find, old vegetables, wild plants, sometimes just water with a few grains of barley floating in it. Your stomach hurts all the time now, and you can see your ribs sticking out under your shirt. When people are this hungry and scared, they need someone to blame. It's easier to believe that a witch is causing the crop failures than to accept that sometimes weather just goes bad for reasons nobody can control. Blaming a witch means there's something you can do about the problem. Find the witch and stop her. But what you and your neighbors don't know is that this terrible weather isn't caused by any witch. It's part of something much bigger happening all across Europe and the world. The Little Ice Age is bringing cold, wet summers that make crops fail everywhere. And when crops fail and people get hungry, they often start looking for someone to blame. It's been 2 months since the crops failed, completely, and your village has changed in ways that frighten you. People who used to be friendly neighbors now whisper in small groups and point at others when they think no one is watching. The hunger has made everyone desperate, but it's the fear that has made them dangerous. Your family's grain stores are nearly empty now. Yesterday, your mother served you a bowl of soup that was mostly water with a few floating pieces of turnip. She smiled and said it was delicious, but you could see her hands shaking as she ladled it out. Your little sister has gotten so thin that her clothes hang on her like empty sacks. Greta, the old woman everyone has been watching suspiciously, made a terrible mistake last week. She was seen gathering herbs in the forest early in the morning when most people were still asleep. When someone asked what she was doing, she said she was looking for plants to help her stomach pain. But to the hungry, frightened villagers, this looked like a witch collecting ingredients for evil spells. The rumors about Greta spread faster than fire through dry grass. People remembered strange things about her. How her vegetable garden always seemed to do better than others. How she sometimes talked to her cats like they could understand her. How she lived alone without a husband or children to take care of her. Your father came home from the village square with a grim expression last Tuesday. They're forming a committee, he told your mother quietly. Pastor Müller, Mayor Heinrich, and some of the other men. They want to investigate the situation with Greta. You know what this means. Even though the adults try to speak in code around you, the committee is going to decide if Greta is a witch. And if they decide she is, something terrible will happen to her. You've heard the stories from other villages. Women accused of witchcraft are sometimes tortured until they confess, then burned at the stake. The committee spent 3 days gathering evidence against Greta. They talked to everyone who had ever had any kind of problem after seeing her. Farmer Klaus told them again about his cow dying after Greta walked past his barn. Miller Hans said his grain had gone mouldy right after Greta visited his mill to trade herbs for flour. Young Maria, who works as a servant for the mayor's family, suddenly remembered a dream she had where she saw Greta flying through the air on a broomstick. The committee wrote this down carefully in their book of evidence. Dreams and visions, they said, were important signs that witchcraft was happening. One morning, you wake up to shouting outside your house. Looking through the window, you see a group of men walking toward Greta's hut carrying ropes and wooden stakes. Your mother pulls you away from the window, but you can hear what's happening. They're arresting Greta and bringing her to the village square for questioning. The whole village gathers to watch as they tie Greta to a chair in front of the church. She looks small and frightened, but she keeps saying she hasn't done anything wrong. Pastor Müller reads from a big book about how to test if someone is a witch. The crowd listens silently, their faces hard and angry. They search Greta's body for marks that might be signs of the devil. When they find a small mole on her arm, several people gasp. Pastor Müller nods gravely and writes in his book. Then they test whether she can recite the Lord's Prayer without making mistakes. When she stumbles over the words because she's scared, more people nod knowingly. The worst test comes when they lower Greta into the village pond to see if she floats. The theory is that water will reject a witch, so if she floats, she's guilty. If she sinks, she's innocent. It's a horrible test, because innocent people can drown, but the committee says it's the only way to know for sure. Greta sinks like a stone, and the men have to pull her out quickly so she doesn't drown. By the rules of the test, this proves she's innocent. But instead of releasing her, the committee decides this test wasn't clear enough. They need to try other methods to be absolutely certain. You watch from behind your father as they bring hot iron rods to press against Greta's hands. If she's innocent, they say, God will protect her from being burned. If she's a witch, the iron will burn her skin. Of course, the hot iron burns her, making her scream in pain. The committee writes down that this proves her guilt. After hours of these terrible tests, Greta is exhausted and in pain. When they ask her again if she's a witch, she finally says yes, just to make the torture stop. She confesses to making deals with the devil, to casting spells on the crops, and to causing the bad weather. The crowd cheers, finally having someone to blame for their suffering. That evening, the village builds a large fire in the square. They tie Greta to a wooden post in the center of the fire and set it alight. As the flames grow higher, she screams that she's innocent, that she only confessed because they hurt her so badly. But her words are lost in the crackling of the fire and the cheers of the villagers. You hide in your house during the burning, but you can see the orange glow through your window and smell the smoke. Your mother holds you tight and whispers that everything will be better now. The witch is gone, she says, so the crops will grow again and the weather will improve. But deep down, you know this isn't true. Greta was just a lonely old woman who knew about herbs and lived by herself. She didn't have any magical powers. She couldn't control the weather any more than you could. The bad weather that caused the crop failures is still here, and burning an innocent woman won't make it go away. What you don't understand yet is that this scene is being repeated in hundreds of villages across Europe. When the Little Ice Age brings crop failures and hunger, frightened people look for someone to blame. And too often, they find their scapegoats in women who are different, alone, or simply unlucky enough to attract suspicion. 3 weeks have passed since Greta was burned in the village square, and nothing has changed. The weather is still cold and wet. The crops are still failing. Your family's food supplies are still running dangerously low. But now, instead of one suspected witch, people in your village are seeing witches everywhere. The committee that investigated Greta hasn't disbanded. Instead, they've grown more powerful and suspicious. Mayor Heinrich says that if one witch was hiding in Millbrook, there might be others. Pastor Mueller agrees, warning that the devil often sends groups of witches to destroy Christian communities. Your neighbor Anna, a woman who has lived in the village for 30 years, made the mistake of arguing with the baker about the price of bread. 2 days later, when the baker's oven cracked and had to be repaired, someone remembered Anna's angry words. Now people are whispering that Anna cursed the oven because she was upset about the bread prices. Your mother has become very quiet and careful about what she says and does. She warns you and your siblings to be polite to everyone and never complain about anything, even when your stomachs hurt from hunger. People are looking for reasons to point fingers, she tells you. Don't give them any reasons to point at our family. Young Wilhelm from the farm next to yours disappeared one night last week. His family found a note saying he was going to try his luck in the city, where maybe there would be more food and work. But Heinrich the mayor suggested another possibility. Maybe Wilhelm didn't leave voluntarily. Maybe he was taken by witches to be sacrificed in their evil rituals. The idea that witches are kidnapping people spreads through the village like a disease. Parents keep their children close to home after dark. People travel in groups instead of walking alone. Every missing chicken, every sick pig, every broken tool becomes potential evidence of witch activity. Martha, the midwife who helps women give birth, has come under suspicion because 2 babies died in the past month. Never mind that babies often die when their mothers are starving and weak. Never mind that Martha has helped deliver hundreds of healthy babies over the years. People remember that midwives sometimes know herbal remedies, and herbs can be used for evil as well as good. The committee started watching Martha carefully. They noted that she sometimes muttered to herself while working. Prayers, she said. But how could they be sure? They noticed that she carried a bag of various herbs and roots. Medicines, she explained. But some people wondered if they might be ingredients for curses. When Farmer Otto's wife went into labor last week, Martha went to help as usual. The birth was difficult, and despite Martha's best efforts, both the mother and baby died. Otto, mad with grief and hunger, immediately accused Martha of killing them on purpose. "She's a witch," he shouted. "She murdered my family." The committee investigated Martha just like they had investigated Greta. They found a scar on her hand from an old cooking accident and declared it a devil's mark. They made her recite prayers while they stuck pins in her arms to see if she felt pain. Witches, they believed, couldn't feel pain in their devil's marks. Martha tried to defend herself. She pointed out all the babies she had successfully delivered, all the women she had helped survive difficult births. But the committee said this just proved how clever she was at hiding her evil nature. A witch, they reasoned, would save most babies to avoid suspicion, then kill a few for Satan. The trial was quicker this time. People were getting used to the process. Martha was tortured until she confessed to being a witch, to making deals with the devil, and to killing babies on purpose. Like Greta, she said whatever they wanted to hear just to make the pain stop. The second burning was smaller than the first. Some people stayed home, uncomfortable with what was happening, but afraid to speak out. Your family watched from the window again, as Martha screamed that she was innocent until the smoke silenced her forever. But still, the weather didn't improve. The crops still lay rotting in the fields. People were still hungry, still scared, still looking for someone to blame. The committee expanded their investigations, looking at anyone who seemed different or suspicious in any way. They started investigating people who complained too much about their situation. If you were angry about the failed crops, maybe you were a witch who had caused the failure. They looked at people who seemed to be doing slightly better than their neighbors. If your family had a little more food stored away, maybe you were getting help from evil spirits. The carpenter's widow, who lived alone with her cat, became the next target. Then the village's only remaining cow died, and people blamed the young woman who had been hired to milk it. Fear spread through Millbrook like a poison, turning neighbor against neighbor, friend against friend. You started having nightmares about being accused yourself. What if someone saw you picking berries in the forest and decided you were gathering witch ingredients? What if you said something wrong or looked at someone the wrong way? The list of things that could make you suspicious seemed to grow longer every day. By winter, your village had burned 5 women as witches. 5 neighbors who had lived peacefully in Millbrook for years, who had raised children and helped their community, were now dead because people needed someone to blame for the cold weather and failed crops. But the Little Ice Age didn't care about the witch trials. The cold weather continued, the crops kept failing, and people kept starving no matter how many innocent women they killed. Eventually, exhaustion and the departure of many families ended the witch hysteria in Millbrook, but the damage was done. A community had destroyed itself from within, while the real cause of their suffering, climate change, continued its relentless work. The witch trials were one of the darkest consequences of the Little Ice Age, showing how desperate people can turn against each other when nature itself seems to be their enemy. Across Europe, thousands of innocent people died because societies couldn't accept that sometimes terrible things happen for reasons beyond human control. You're a Spanish soldier named Diego, and in the year 1570, you're standing on a mountainside in Peru, thousands of miles from your home in Spain. The air is thin up here in the Andes Mountains, and you're still getting used to breathing at this high altitude. But what really catches your attention isn't the thin air. It's the strange plants growing all around you. The local people, the Incas, grow crops here that you've never seen before. There's corn, of course, which the Spanish already know about. But there are also these odd plants with purple flowers and leaves that look almost like tomato plants. When you ask your Inca guide what they are, he digs into the soil and pulls up several lumpy, dirty objects about the size of your fist. Papa, he says, which is their word for these underground vegetables. He brushes the dirt off one and takes a bite, chewing thoughtfully. He offers you one, but you shake your head. It looks too strange, too foreign. You're not even sure if it's safe for Spanish people to eat. Your captain, Francisco, is more interested in gold than in vegetables. He's heard stories about Inca treasures, hidden in these mountains. But you find yourself curious about how these people survive in such harsh conditions. The weather here is cold and unpredictable, yet the Incas seem to have plenty of food. The Inca guide explains that these papa plants are perfect for mountain farming. They grow well in cold weather, they don't mind frost, and they produce a lot of food from a small amount of land. He shows you terraced fields carved into the mountainsides where thousands of these plants are growing. You learn that the Incas have been growing potatoes, that's what you decide to call them, for thousands of years. They have dozens of different varieties, each one adapted to different conditions. Some grow best at high altitudes, others prefer lower elevations. Some resist diseases better, others taste sweeter. The way the Incas preserve potatoes fascinates you. They spread them out on the cold mountain ground at night, letting them freeze solid. During the day, they step on the frozen potatoes to squeeze out the water. After several days of this freezing, thawing, and squeezing, the potatoes become black, dried chunks that can be stored for years without spoiling. Your fellow soldiers think you're wasting time learning about vegetables. They make fun of you for asking the natives so many questions about farming. We're here for gold and glory, they say, not to become farmers, but you have a feeling these strange underground vegetables might be important someday. When it's time to return to Spain, you secretly pack some potato tubers in your belongings. You're not sure if they'll survive the long sea voyage, but you want to try growing them back home. The Inca guide gives you careful instructions about planting and caring for potatoes, though you're not sure you understand everything. The voyage back to Spain takes 3 months. You keep the potatoes in a wooden box in your cabin, checking on them daily. Some start to sprout during the journey, which gives you hope that they're still alive. By the time you reach Spanish ports, you have 25 potato tubers that look healthy enough to plant. Back in your home village in northern Spain, you present the potatoes to your family with great excitement. You tell them about the amazing Inca terraces and how these vegetables could feed many people even in poor soil and cold weather. Your father, a farmer, looks at the dirty lumps with skepticism. These look like something you'd feed to pigs, your mother says, turning one over in her hands. Your younger brother laughs and says they look like rocks with eyes. Nobody in your family wants to try eating them, but they agree to let you plant them in a corner of their vegetable garden. You plant the potatoes carefully, following the Inca guide's instructions as best you can remember them. You hill up soil around the plants as they grow, and you water them regularly. To your amazement, they thrive in the Spanish soil. By harvest time, each plant has produced several potatoes, much larger than the ones you brought from Peru. When you cook and serve the first potatoes to your family, they remain suspicious. The potatoes taste bland compared to bread or other familiar foods. Your father complains that they fill you up but don't have much flavor. Your mother worries that eating too many might make the family sick. Word of your strange vegetables spreads through the village slowly. A few curious neighbors come to see the potato plants growing in your garden. Most shake their heads and say they look like weeds. Some whisper that anything that grows underground might be evil or unnatural. The local priest is particularly concerned about potatoes. He points out that potatoes aren't mentioned anywhere in the Bible, which makes him suspicious of them. He wonders why God would make food that grows hidden in the dirt instead of reaching toward heaven, like wheat and other proper grains. You try to convince people that potatoes could be very useful, especially for poor families or during years when grain crops fail. But most villagers prefer to stick with foods they know and trust. Wheat makes bread, which is the foundation of every meal. Why would anyone want to eat these strange tubers instead? A few forward-thinking farmers agree to plant small patches of potatoes, more out of curiosity than conviction. But even they treat potatoes as food for animals rather than people. They feed potatoes to their pigs and cattle, noting that the animals seem to like them and grow fat on them. What you don't know yet is that the potatoes you brought from Peru will eventually save millions of lives. They will help Europe survive the worst years of the Little Ice Age, when traditional crops fail and people starve. But first, you and others like you will have to overcome centuries of suspicion and convince people that these humble tubers are actually a miracle food. It's now 1650. And you're the grandson of Diego, the soldier who brought potatoes to Spain. Your grandfather died 10 years ago, but he left behind something remarkable. A small field where potato plants grow thick and healthy every year. While your neighbors struggle with failed wheat crops because of the cold, wet weather, your family always has enough to eat. This year has been particularly difficult for everyone except your family. The Little Ice Age has brought another summer of cold rain and early frost. Most of the wheat and barley fields in your village produced almost nothing. But your potato field, which your grandfather taught your father to tend, has given your family enough food to last through the winter. Your neighbors have started to pay attention to your family's potato patch. When other families are going hungry, your family stays healthy and well fed. Some people are beginning to ask questions about those strange underground vegetables that your grandfather brought back from the Americas. Your father has been trying to give away potato tubers to neighbors for years, hoping they'll plant them and discover how useful they are. But most people still refuse to eat potatoes regularly. They'll accept them when they're truly desperate. But they go back to preferring bread as soon as any grain is available. The biggest problem is that potatoes just don't feel like real food to most Europeans. Bread has been the main food for as long as anyone can remember. People say daily bread in their prayers, not daily potatoes. To many folks, a meal without bread doesn't count as a proper meal at all. Last month, a traveling merchant from France stopped in your village. He told your father that potatoes are becoming more popular in some parts of France, especially among poor people who can't afford grain. A French doctor named Antoine Parmentier has been promoting them, the merchant said. He says potatoes are healthier than bread This French doctor, Parmentier, had an interesting story. He was a prisoner of war in Prussia, where his captors fed him nothing but potatoes for months. When he returned to France, he was healthier than when he left. This convinced him that potatoes were not only safe to eat, but actually good for people. Your father decided to try a clever trick to make potatoes more popular in your village. He hired some local men to stand guard over his potato field during the day, as if the potatoes were very valuable. But at night, he left the field unguarded. Soon, people started sneaking into the field after dark to steal potato tubers, thinking they were getting something precious. The plan worked better than expected. The stolen potatoes got planted in secret gardens around the village. People who stole them felt like they had discovered something valuable that your family was trying to keep for themselves. Within a year, potato plants were growing in hidden corners all over the village. Your younger sister Maria has become very good at cooking potatoes in different ways. She boils them with salt and herbs to make them taste better. She mashes them with milk when there are cows giving milk. She even learned to slice them thin and fry them in fat, which makes them crispy and delicious. The village priest has finally stopped preaching against potatoes. He used to say they were food for animals, not people, and that eating them regularly was against God's plan. But when his own garden failed last year and your family shared potatoes with him, he changed his mind. Now he says God provides food in many forms. Some wealthy landowners in other parts of Spain have started growing potatoes as a backup crop. They still plant wheat and barley as their main crops, but they keep fields of potatoes too. When grain prices are high because of crop failures, they sell their potatoes to hungry city dwellers who have no choice but to accept them. The poor have been the quickest to adopt potatoes as regular food. Rich people can afford to buy grain even when it's expensive, so they don't need alternatives. But poor families will eat anything that keeps them from starving. Once they discover that potatoes are filling, nutritious, and available when other foods are scarce, they become loyal potato eaters. Your family has started selling potatoes in the market in the nearest town. At first, people would only buy them as food for their animals. But gradually, more customers have started buying potatoes for their own families. Your father always includes simple recipes written on small pieces of paper when he sells potatoes to new customers. One great advantage of potatoes is that they're much harder to steal than grain. Wheat and other crops can be cut and carried away quickly by thieves, but potatoes stay hidden underground until you dig them up. During times when hungry people raid farms looking for food, potato fields often escape notice completely. You've heard that in Ireland, across the sea, potatoes have become extremely popular. Poor Irish families have adopted potatoes as their main food because they can grow so much nutrition in small plots of land. Some Irish families eat almost nothing but potatoes, milk, and occasionally a bit of fish or meat. Your father worries about people depending too heavily on potatoes. He remembers the stories your grandfather told about how the Incas grew many different varieties of potatoes as protection against disease. If everyone grows the same kind of potato, your father says, a single disease could destroy everyone's food at once. Despite his concerns, your father continues to promote potato growing throughout the region. He trades potato varieties with other growers, trying to develop types that grow well in Spanish soil and climate. Some varieties do better in sandy soil, others in clay. Some resist certain diseases better than others. What your family doesn't realize yet is that potatoes will soon become crucial for Europe's survival. The Little Ice Age will bring more years of failed grain crops. Wars will disrupt food supplies, and populations will grow beyond what traditional agriculture can support. When those crises come, the humble potato that your grandfather brought from Peru will help keep millions of people alive. It's 1740, and you're the great-grandson of the soldier who first brought potatoes to Spain. You now live in Prussia, where you moved as a young man to marry your wife and take over her family's farm. This year, disaster has struck across Europe in ways that your ancestors never imagined possible. The winter of 1739 was the coldest anyone alive can remember. Rivers froze solid for months. The ground stayed frozen so deep that spring planting was delayed until almost summer. When plants finally did sprout, they faced constant threats from late frosts, cold rain, and short growing seasons. All across Europe, grain crops have failed completely. Wheat, rye, barley, and oats, the foods that have fed Europeans for thousands of years, have produced almost nothing. In some regions, people are eating tree bark, grass, and anything else they can find just to survive. Many villages have lost half their population to starvation and disease. But here's the miracle that saves your family and thousands like you. Your potato fields are thriving. While grain crops wither and die in the cold, wet conditions, your potatoes grow happily underground, protected from frost and harsh weather. What once seemed like a strange foreign vegetable has become the difference between life and death. Your neighbor Klaus, who used to mock your family for eating pig food, came to your door last week begging for potato tubers to plant. His children are thin and weak from hunger, and his wife coughs constantly because her body is too weak to fight off illness. You give him seeds freely, knowing that in times like these, helping neighbors is the only way communities survive. Local government has started promoting potato cultivation with desperate urgency. Officials who once dismissed potatoes as inferior food now distribute tubers to farmers for free and offer prizes for the largest potato harvests. They've realized that potatoes might be the only thing standing between their people and mass starvation. Frederick the Great, the King of Prussia, has become one of the strongest supporters of potato farming. He issues orders requiring farmers to plant potatoes, posts soldiers to guard potato fields during harvest time to prevent desperate people from stealing the seed stock, and even eats potatoes publicly to show that they're fit for royal consumption. Joam's wife has become an expert at preparing potatoes in dozens of different ways. She makes potato bread by mixing mashed potatoes with whatever flour is available. She creates potato soup that can feed the whole family with just a few vegetables added. She even makes a kind of potato wine that helps people forget their troubles on the coldest nights. The Irish, across the sea, have embraced potatoes so completely that they've survived this terrible year better than many other countries. Irish families who once lived on the edge of starvation now eat enough potato-based meals to stay healthy. Some people call Ireland the Potato Island because potatoes have become such an important part of life there. Children born in the past few years don't remember a time when potatoes weren't important food. To them, it seems natural to eat potatoes every day. They don't understand why their grandparents used to look down on potatoes or prefer bread. For these children, potatoes aren't foreign or strange. They're just food. Your potato fields have allowed you to help not just your immediate neighbors, but people from far away. Refugees from regions where the famine is worse stop at your farm, asking for any food you can spare. You often share potato soup and give people tubers to take with them as they search for places where they might survive. The amazing thing about potatoes is how much nutrition they provide compared to other crops. Your family stays healthy eating mainly potatoes, with just small amounts of meat, dairy, and vegetables when available. Potatoes contain most of the vitamins and minerals that people need, unlike grains that must be supplemented with other foods. You've learned to store potatoes through the winter much better than your ancestors knew how. You keep them in root, cellars dug deep underground, where the temperature stays stable and the potatoes don't freeze or rot. Some years, you can keep potatoes fresh until the new harvest comes in, providing food year-round. The most remarkable change is in people's attitudes toward potatoes. What once seemed like desperate, poor people's food has become recognized as smart, practical nutrition. Wealthy families who used to serve only grain-based dishes now proudly offer potato recipes to their guests. Cookbooks include entire chapters devoted to potato dishes. Medical doctors have started recommending potatoes for various health problems. They've noticed that people who eat mostly potatoes during these difficult times stay healthier than those who try to survive on limited amounts of bread and grain. Some doctors even claim that potatoes can prevent certain diseases. Your youngest son, who knows how to grow, harvest, and prepare potatoes in many ways, talks about traveling to other countries to teach people about potato farming. He says there, are places in southern Europe where people still don't understand how valuable potatoes can be, especially during difficult times. What neither your family nor most Europeans fully understand yet is that potatoes have fundamentally changed how many people European land can support. Before potatoes, famines regularly killed large portions of the population when grain crops failed. Now, potato farming provides a backup that can keep people alive even during the worst weather. The Little Ice Age brought some of the harshest weather in European history, but it also forced the continent to adopt crops that could survive harsh conditions. The potato, which traveled from the mountains of Peru to the fields of Europe, became one of the most important foods in human history. Your great-grandfather's curiosity about a strange foreign plant has helped save countless lives. By the time the Little Ice Age finally ends and warmer weather returns, potatoes will be so deeply embedded in European agriculture and diet that no one will remember a time when they weren't essential. The humble tuber that once seemed fit only for animals will have proven itself the salvation of a continent. You live in a small village called Grindelwald, nestled in a valley in the Swiss Alps in the year 1580. Your village has been here for hundreds of years, and your family has farmed the same land for as long as anyone can remember. The mountains around you are beautiful, with white snow on their peaks all year round, and thick rivers of ice called glaciers flowing slowly down their sides. Your grandfather tells you stories about when he was young, about how the glaciers used to be much smaller and farther up the mountain. You could walk right up to where the ice ends, he says, pointing toward the nearest glacier. Now look at it. Every year it creeps closer to us, like a giant white snake slithering down the mountain. The glacier nearest to your village is called the Lower Grindelwald Glacier. When your grandfather was a boy, it ended far up the valley, maybe half a day's walk from the village. But now, you can see its white tongue reaching down much closer. Some of the older folks in the village whisper that, at the rate it's moving, it might reach the village itself someday. Your father is a farmer who grows barley and oats in the fields around the village. But farming has been getting harder lately. The growing season seems shorter each year. Frost comes earlier in the fall and stays later in the spring. Sometimes your crops get damaged by cold air that flows down from the growing glaciers like an invisible river. The strangest thing about glaciers is how they make their own weather. The big chunks of ice create cold winds that blow down into the valley. On summer mornings, you can feel cool air flowing off the glacier like breath from a sleeping giant. This cold air makes farming difficult in fields that used to produce good crops. Your village has about 150 people living in wooden houses, scattered around the valley floor. Everyone knows everyone else, and people help each other with the hard work of mountain farming. But lately, some families have started talking about leaving. They say it's getting too cold to farm successfully, and they're worried about what might happen if the glaciers keep growing. Last winter, an avalanche destroyed 3 houses on the edge of the village. Avalanches aren't new in the mountains, but they seem to be getting bigger and more frequent. Your father says it's because there's more snow and ice on the mountainsides now, which makes slides more likely and more dangerous. The village priest, Father Bernard, tries to keep everyone's spirits up during his Sunday sermons. He says that God is testing the community's faith with difficult times, and that if everyone prays hard enough and lives righteously, the glaciers will stop advancing. But you can see worry in his eyes when he looks up at the white ice creeping toward your valley. Your job is to help your father with the livestock. Your family has cows, goats, and sheep that graze in the high meadows during summer. But the good, grazing land is shrinking as the ice advances. Pastures that your grandfather used for his animals are now covered with ice and snow year-round. Each summer, you have to take the animals higher and farther to find grass for them to eat. The most frightening thing happened last month. Old Hans, who lives in the house closest to the glacier, found that a stream that had flowed behind his property for decades was completely gone. The advancing ice had covered its source, redirecting the water underground or freezing it entirely. Now Hans has to walk much farther to get water for his family and animals. Several village families have decided to move some of their most valuable possessions to higher ground, just in case. They're building smaller cabins up the mountainsides where they can store grain, tools, and other important items. Better safe than sorry, your neighbor says as he carries a heavy chest up a steep trail. You've noticed that the glacier makes constant noise. During the day, you can hear creaking, cracking, and grinding sounds as the massive ice river slowly pushes forward. Sometimes chunks of ice break off and tumble down the mountainside with loud crashes that echo through the valley. At night, these sounds seem even louder and more frightening. The miller who grinds grain for the village has a serious problem. His mill uses water from a stream that flows from melting ice on the mountainside. But as the glacier advances, it's changing where the water flows. Some days, there's too much water and it threatens to wash away his mill wheel. Other days, there's too little water to power the mill at all. Children in the village have grown up with these advancing glaciers as a normal part of life. They don't remember when the ice was farther away. To them, the glacier creeping closer each year seems natural. They even play games where they dare each other to get close to the ice edge, though their parents forbid this dangerous activity. One thing that puzzles everyone is why the glaciers are growing. The mountains have always had glaciers, but they stayed in the same places for generations. Now suddenly, they're advancing down the valleys like slow-motion floods of ice. Some people wonder if it's a punishment from God. Others think it might be the end of the world approaching. What you don't know yet is that you're witnessing one of the most dramatic effects of the Little Ice Age. All across the Alps, glaciers are advancing for the first time in centuries, pushing down into valleys where people have lived safely for generations. Your village is just one of many that will face this creeping threat of ice in the coming decades. 20 years have passed, and you now have children of your own. It's 1600, and the situation with the lower Grindelwald Glacier has gotten much worse. What used to be a distant wall of ice has become an immediate threat that hangs over your village like a sword waiting to fall. The glacier has advanced so far down the valley that it's only a few hundred yards from the first houses. Can see it clearly from your front door. A massive wall of dirty white ice rising up like a frozen waterfall. The ice is full of rocks and dirt that the glacier has scraped up during its slow journey down the mountain. Your friend Johann's farm is gone. The land where his family grew crops for 3 generations is now buried under 50 feet of ice. Johann and his family had to abandon their house last summer when ice began pushing against their barn. They moved in with relatives in the village, but everyone knows this is just temporary. Soon, more families will lose their homes. The worst part isn't just the ice itself, but everything that comes with it. The glacier brings bitter cold winds that can kill crops even in summer. It changes how water flows through the valley, sometimes flooding fields, and other times leaving them completely dry. And the constant noise, grinding, cracking, groaning, keeps everyone on edge, day and night. Your oldest son, Peter, is now 15 and helps you tend the family's remaining animals. You've had to sell most of your cows because there's not enough grazing land left. The glacier has covered the best mountain pastures, and what grass remains often gets damaged by the cold air flowing off the ice. Peter talks about leaving the village to find work in lower valleys where farming is still possible. The village council meets every week now to discuss what to do about the glacier. Some people want to try digging channels to redirect the ice, though nobody knows if that would work. Others suggest abandoning the village entirely and resettling somewhere safer. But where would 150 people go? And who would want to take in refugees from a village being destroyed by ice? Father Bernard still holds church services, but his sermons have gotten darker. He reads from the Bible about floods and disasters as signs of God's judgment. Some villagers have started to believe that their community is being punished for some unknown sin. They pray harder, give more money to the church, and try to live more righteously, hoping to make the glacier stop advancing. Your wife, Anna, has become skilled at preserving food and making the most of limited resources. With shorter growing seasons and less farmland, every bit of food is precious. She dries vegetables, smokes meat when animals have to be slaughtered, and makes bread with whatever grain is available. Some years your family eats potatoes for most meals because they grow better in the cold than wheat or barley. The strangest sight in your valley is the line where the glacier ends. There's a clear boundary between the world of ice and the world of plants and soil. You can walk right up to this boundary and touch the glacier with your hand. The ice is incredibly hard and cold, filled with trapped air bubbles and bits of rock and wood that the glacier picked up during its journey. Some villagers have tried fighting the glacier in desperate ways. They've built stone walls trying to block its advance, but the ice simply pushes through or flows around them like they weren't there. A few men spent a summer digging trenches to try to redirect the glacier, but the ice filled in their trenches and kept moving forward. The advancing glacier has created new dangers that nobody expected. Chunks of ice regularly break off and come crashing down the mountainside. These icefalls can destroy houses, kill livestock, or injure people who get too close. Your neighbor's son was hurt last year when a piece of ice the size of a wagon tumbled down and smashed against his house while he was working outside. Water has become a constant problem. Sometimes the glacier blocks streams, causing floods in unexpected places. Other times, it redirects water underground, leaving parts of the valley dry. Your village well, which has provided clean water for generations, sometimes goes dry for weeks at a time when the glacier changes how groundwater flows. The cold air from the glacier affects people's health too. Many villagers cough more in winter, and children seem to get sick more often. Old people complain that their joints hurt more when cold air flows down from the ice. Your grandmother developed a persistent cough that she never had before the glacier came so close to the village. Some plants and animals can't survive near the advancing ice. The apple trees that used to grow at the upper end of the valley are all dead now. Birds that used to nest in this area have stopped coming. Even wild animals, like deer and rabbits, have moved to lower, warmer parts of the valley, making hunting much more difficult. Your daughter, Maria, who is 12 years old, has lived her whole life with the threat of the glacier. She doesn't remember when it was farther away, so to her, living under the shadow of advancing ice seems normal. She plays games with other children, where they pretend to be escaping from glaciers, not realizing that this might become reality someday. The saddest thing is watching older villagers like your father, who remember when the valley was green and warm all the way up to the mountains. They talk about the good old days, when harvests were abundant and nobody worried about ice destroying their homes. But those days seem like stories from a different world now. What's becoming clear to everyone is that the glacier isn't going to stop advancing on its own. Each year, it pushes a little farther down the valley. Soon, the village will have to make a choice: abandon their homes and move somewhere safer, or stay and risk being buried under the ice like Johann's farm. The Little Ice Age is changing the Alps in ways that nobody could have predicted. The glaciers that stayed in the same places for centuries are now moving like slow-motion disasters, forcing entire communities to reconsider where and how they can live in the mountains. It's 1635, and you're now an old man of 75, watching your village disappear forever. The lower Grindelwald Glacier has advanced so far that it's only 30 yards from the village church, the heart of your community for over 300 years. The massive wall of ice rises up like a frozen mountain, casting your entire village in cold shadow for most of the day. Your grandson, Thomas, is helping you pack the last of your belongings into a wooden cart. Everything your family has accumulated over generations must fit into this one cart because that's all you can take with you. The rest, your house, your barns, the graves of your ancestors, will stay here to be buried under the advancing ice. The village council made the final decision last week. With only about 40 people left in Grindelwald, it's no longer possible to maintain a community. The glacier has taken too much farmland, caused too many problems with water and weather, and created too many dangers from falling ice and avalanches. Everyone must leave before winter comes. Your son Peter, now middle-aged with children of his own, chose to leave 5 years ago. He took his family to a valley farther north where they could still farm without the constant threat of advancing ice. You've received letters from him saying they're doing well, but you can tell he misses his birthplace. "Come join us, Father," his letters always say. "There's room for you here, but you couldn't leave until now. This village has been your home for 75 years. Your wife Anna is buried in the churchyard. Your parents and grandparents are buried there too. How could you abandon them to the ice? But now even the churchyard is in danger." The glacier's advance has accelerated in recent years, moving forward several yards each month instead of just a few feet per year like before. Father Benedict, who replaced Father Bernard when he died 15 years ago, is conducting one final church service in the old wooden building. The pews that used to be full now hold just a dozen elderly people who, like you, couldn't bear to leave until forced to. Father Benedict's voice echoes strangely in the nearly empty church as he prays for the souls of all who lived and died in this place. The most heartbreaking sight is the abandoned houses scattered throughout the valley. Some families left so quickly that they left furniture and belongings behind. Windows stare out like empty eyes at the approaching ice. Gardens that once fed families have gone wild, with grass and weeds growing through what used to be neat rows of vegetables. Your neighbor Klaus, who is even older than you, has decided not to leave. He sits on the porch of his house, watching the glacier advance, saying he's too old to start over somewhere else. "Let the ice take me," he says. "I'd rather die in my own home than as a stranger in some foreign valley." Several people have tried to convince him to change his mind, but Klaus is stubborn. The worst part of leaving is knowing that no one will ever live here again. This isn't like a fire or flood where people can rebuild afterward. The glacier will cover everything, so completely that future generations won't even know a village existed here. All the history, all the memories, all the stories will be buried under hundreds of feet of ice. Thomas helps you load the last bag into the cart. It contains a few family treasures: your father's tools, Anna's wedding dress, some books and papers, and a wooden cross that your great-grandfather carved. These few objects represent everything your family achieved during centuries of living in this valley. As your cart starts moving down the valley road for the last time, you look back at the village church. The glacier is so close now that chunks of ice occasionally break off and crash in the churchyard. Within a month, maybe two, the ice will reach the church building itself. By next summer, the church will be completely buried. You pass the ruins of Johann's farm, which was abandoned 40 years ago. The ice has completely covered where his house used to stand. Only the top of his barn roof is still visible, sticking up through the ice like a monument to the village that used to be. Soon, even that will disappear as the glacier continues its relentless advance. The road out of the valley is crowded with other families leaving on the same day. Carts loaded with belongings, elderly people walking slowly, children looking back confused at the only home they've ever known. Everyone is quiet, lost in their own thoughts about what they're leaving behind and what uncertain future awaits them. At the highest point on the road, where you can look back and see the entire valley one last time, you stop your cart. From here, you can see how much the glacier has advanced during your lifetime. The white ice now covers more than half the valley floor. The village, which once seemed so permanent and secure, looks tiny and vulnerable in the shadow of the massive glacier. Thomas puts his hand on your shoulder as you wipe tears from your eyes. "Tell me about Grindelwald, when you were young," he says, "so I can tell my children someday." And so you begin to speak about green meadows where ice now lies, about warm summers in a place that now knows only cold, about a community that thrived for centuries until the mountains themselves rose up and reclaimed the land. Your cart rolls down the mountain road toward an uncertain future. Behind you, the lower Grindelwald Glacier continues its patient advance, erasing all traces of human life from a valley where people lived for over 600 years. The Little Ice Age has claimed another victory in its slow war against medieval civilization. But the ice won't stay forever. Centuries later, when the climate warms again, the glacier will retreat. Scientists will find artifacts and ruins exposed by the melting ice. Coins, tools, bits of houses, proof that people once made their lives in this valley. Your village will become a piece of evidence showing how dramatically climate change can reshape the world and force entire communities to disappear. You're an astronomer named Johannes, living in London in the year 1645. Every clear day, you climb to the top of your house with your new telescope, one of the latest inventions that allows you to see things in the sky that no human has ever seen before. You've been studying the sun for 5 years now, carefully tracking the dark spots that appear and disappear on its surface. These dark marks on the sun, which you call sunspots, have fascinated you since you first saw them through your telescope. They look like tiny dark freckles on the sun's bright face. Sometimes there are many of them, sometimes just a few. They appear, grow larger, then fade away after several days or weeks. You carefully draw pictures of them in your journal every day the weather allows. Your fellow astronomers in other countries send you letters describing their own sunspot observations. Galileo in Italy was one of the first to write about these spots, and astronomers across Europe now regularly study them. It's exciting to be part of this new science of watching the sun closely and trying to understand what these mysterious spots might mean. But lately, something very strange has been happening. For the past 2 years, you've seen fewer and fewer sunspots. Some weeks you see none at all. This is very different from what you observed when you started watching the sun. Back then, you could usually find several spots on any clear day. Now, you often spend hours looking through your telescope without seeing a single one. You've been corresponding with other astronomers to see if they're seeing the same thing. Jean-Dominique Cassini in Paris writes that he too has noticed far fewer sunspots than usual. Scientists in Germany and the Netherlands report the same thing. It seems that all across Europe, people who study the sun are seeing the same strange phenomenon. What makes this even more puzzling is that the lack of sunspots seems to coincide with unusually cold weather. This winter was one of the harshest anyone can remember. The Thames River in London froze so solid that people held markets on the ice. Even in summer, the weather has been cooler and rainier than normal. You wonder if there might be some connection between what's happening on the sun and what's happening on Earth. Your wife, Margaret, thinks you spend too much time staring at the sun. It can't be healthy, she says, looking at something so bright all day. You try to explain that you're using dark glass to protect your eyes and that you're making important discoveries about the heavens. But she worries that your obsession with sunspots is affecting your health and mood. The truth is, you are becoming obsessed with this mystery. You've gone back through all your old journals, counting the sunspots you recorded each month. The pattern is clear. Starting in 1643, the number of sunspots began dropping dramatically. By 1644, you were seeing about half as many as in previous years. Now, in 1645, some months go by without you seeing any sunspots at all. You've also noticed that the sunspots you do see look different than before. They seem smaller and fainter, and they don't last as long. In the past, large sunspots might persist for weeks, slowly changing shape as they moved across the sun's surface. Now, when spots do appear, they often fade away after just a few days. Your friend Robert, who works as a merchant, thinks you're wasting your time studying sunspots. What difference does it make? He asks. Whether there are spots on the sun or not doesn't change anything here on Earth. But you're beginning to suspect he's wrong. The timing of the disappearing sunspots and the unusually cold weather seems like more than just coincidence. You've started keeping records not just of sunspots, but of weather patterns too. You note when frost comes, how long winter lasts, when spring arrives, and how warm summers get. You're creating a detailed log that might help future scientists understand the connection between what happens on the sun and what happens on Earth. Other strange things have been happening in the sky. Aurora borealis, the northern lights, which used to appear several times a year over England, have become extremely rare. You remember seeing beautiful dancing lights in the northern sky when you were a child, but you haven't seen them at all in the past 3 years. Some old people say they haven't seen aurora since their own childhood. At the Royal Society, where you meet with other men of science, there's growing discussion about whether the sun itself might be changing. Some members think the sun goes through cycles of activity, like the phases of the moon, but much longer. Others believe that something fundamental about the sun has changed, something that might affect the entire world. Your daily routine has become centered around watching the sun. Every morning when you wake up, you check the weather. If it's clear, you set up your telescope and spend hours examining the sun's surface. You've become expert at recognizing every small dark area that might be a forming sunspot. But most days, now, you see nothing but the sun's blank, bright surface. The lack of sunspots has made you realize how much they had become part of your expectations about the sun. When you first started observing them, you thought of them as flaws or blemishes on the perfect surface of the sun. Now that they're gone, the sun seems strangely empty and quiet, like a face without expression. What you don't know yet is that you're witnessing the beginning of one of the most remarkable periods in recorded solar history. The sunspots aren't just temporarily reduced. They're about to disappear almost completely for the next 70 years. You're documenting the start of what future scientists will call the Maunder Minimum, a time when the sun will go unusually quiet, just as the Earth enters the coldest period of the Little Ice Age. 25 years have passed, and you're now an old man of 70. It's 1670, and you're still climbing to your rooftop each morning to observe the sun through your telescope, though your hands shake more now and your eyes aren't as sharp as they once were. What you've discovered during these decades would astonish your younger self. The sun has remained almost completely blank of spots for over 2 decades. Your journals from this period tell an incredible story. In some years, you recorded seeing no sunspots at all, not one. In the best years, you might have spotted 5 or 6 throughout the entire 12 months. Compare this to your early observations, when you routinely saw dozens of spots each year, and the change is dramatic beyond anything you could have imagined. Your grandson William, now a young man of 20, helps you with your observations and has learned to use the telescope himself. But for him, a sun without spots seems normal. He's never seen the kind of active sun that you remember from your youth, when dark spots regularly decorated the solar surface like freckles on a child's face. The weather during these 25 years has been unlike anything in living memory. Winters have been longer and harsher. Summers have been cooler and rainier. Crops fail regularly across Europe. The Thames in London has frozen solid multiple times, allowing people to hold entire festivals on its icy surface. Even wine grapes can no longer grow in northern England, where they thrived just decades ago. You've maintained correspondence with astronomers across Europe throughout this period. Everyone reports the same thing: a sun that appears almost dead, without the spots that scientists had come to expect as normal solar behavior. Jean-Dominique Cassini in Paris, now an old man like yourself, writes that his records show an average of fewer than 1 sunspot per year for the past 2 decades. The aurora borealis, which you remember seeing regularly in your youth, have completely disappeared from English skies. Your grandmother used to tell stories about how the northern lights would dance across the sky several times each winter, sometimes bright enough to read by. But William has never seen them, and many young people don't even believe such things exist. Some of your fellow scientists have proposed theories about what's happening to the sun. Dr. Christopher Wren suggests that the sun might be cooling down, like a fire that's running out of fuel. Others think the sun goes through very long cycles of activity and quiet, and we're simply living through a quiet period that might last decades or even centuries. The practical effects of this solar quiet and the accompanying cold weather have been devastating. Food shortages are common. Famines strike different regions of Europe regularly. The growing season is so short and unreliable that farmers have had to change what crops they plant. Hardier grains that can survive cooler weather have replaced wheat in many areas. Your wife Margaret died 5 years ago during a particularly harsh winter when coal was scarce and food was expensive. She never did understand your fascination with sunspots, but she lived long enough to see that your observations were documenting something truly extraordinary. Before she died, she made you promise to continue recording your findings for future generations. The older generation, People who remember the sunspot-rich sun of the early 1600s are beginning to die off. Soon, your memories of an active sun will be among the last first-hand accounts. Most people alive now accept the current quiet sun as normal, not realizing that they're living through an unusual period in solar history. You've noticed that people have become more religious during these difficult times. Church attendance has increased as people pray for warmer weather and better harvests. Some preachers claim that the cold weather and failed crops are signs that the end times are approaching. Others say it's God's punishment for human sin. Your detailed records now fill dozens of notebooks. You've documented not just the absence of sunspots, but also the correlation with cold weather, failed harvests, and other earthly phenomena. You've begun to suspect that the sun's activity, or lack thereof, somehow influences Earth's climate in ways that no one yet understands. Trade routes have changed because of the consistently cold weather. Ships that used to sail northern routes now avoid them because of increased sea ice. Some exploration voyages to the Arctic have been abandoned because the ice extends much farther south than it did when you were young. The world seems to be getting smaller and more dangerous. William has started to write down your stories about the old days when the sun had many spots and the weather was warmer. He finds it hard to believe that England once grew wine grapes and that the Thames rarely froze. To him, the tales of your youth sound almost like fairy stories about a different world. You've also been corresponding with scientists from other countries about climate patterns. Reports from China describe unusually cold winters and late spring floods. Letters from colonial America mention harsh winters and short growing seasons. It seems that whatever is affecting Europe is happening worldwide. The most disturbing thing is watching younger scientists accept the spotless sun as normal. Some have suggested that the early observers like Galileo might have been mistaken, that the sunspots they reported were perhaps just illusions or telescope defects. Only the careful records kept by astronomers like yourself prove that the sun really was different in the past. As winter approaches again, you prepare your telescope for another year of watching a blank sun. You're no longer hopeful that the spots will return in your lifetime. Instead, you focus on documenting this remarkable period for future generations, who might live to see the sun become active again. Little do you know that this solar quiet will continue for another 15 years after your death, making this the longest period of solar inactivity in recorded history. It's 1715, and you are William, grandson of the astronomer Johannes, who spent decades documenting the sun's strange behavior. Your grandfather died 10 years ago, but he passed on to you his telescopes, his detailed journals, and most importantly, his passion for watching the sun. You've continued his work, and after 45 years of observing a mostly blank sun, something incredible is happening. The sunspots are coming back. This morning, as you set up your telescope on the roof of your house, you feel the same excitement your grandfather must have felt when he first saw sunspots through his telescope 70 years ago. After months of seeing only one or two small spots, today you count 7 distinct dark areas on the sun's surface. For someone who grew up seeing maybe 2 or 3 sunspots per year, this feels like a miracle. Your grandfather's journals, which you've read and reread countless times, describe a sun that regularly had dozens of spots. But to you, even these 7 spots represent the most active the sun has been during your lifetime. You carefully draw each one in your journal, just as your grandfather taught you to do, noting their size, shape, and position on the solar surface. The change in the bright sun seems to be connected to changes in Earth's weather, just as your grandfather suspected. This past winter was noticeably warmer than the brutal winters you remember from your childhood. Spring came earlier, and summer lasted longer. Farmers are reporting better harvests, and food is becoming more affordable in the markets. You've been corresponding with astronomers across Europe who are all reporting the same phenomenon. The sun is becoming active again after decades of quiet. Jean-Dominique Cassini in Paris, son of the astronomer your grandfather knew, writes that there Observations in France show the same increase in sunspot activity. Scientists in Germany and Italy report similar findings. The return of sunspots has caused great excitement at the Royal Society in London. Many current members have never seen an active sun, having begun their scientific careers during the quiet period. Some older members who remember the sunspot-rich sun from their youth are saying, "I told you they would come back." But even they seem surprised by how long the quiet period lasted. What's particularly fascinating is how the sunspots are returning gradually. First, just one or two small spots would appear for a few days, then disappear for weeks. Then 3 or 4 spots might be visible at once. Now you're regularly seeing multiple groups of spots, some quite large. It's as if the sun is slowly waking up from a long sleep. The aurora borealis have returned too, something that amazes everyone except the very oldest people. Last winter, for the first time in decades, dancing lights appeared in the northern sky over England. People came out of their houses to stare in wonder at these shimmering green and red curtains that moved across the stars. Many thought it was a sign from God. Your neighbour Thomas, who is your age, had never seen northern lights before last winter. "I thought you and the old books were making them up," he admitted after watching the aurora for hours. "I couldn't believe that lights could dance in the sky like that." Now he joins you sometimes on your rooftop to watch for both sunspots and auroras. The improved weather has brought changes throughout society. With more reliable harvests, food is cheaper and people are healthier. Trade routes that were abandoned during the coldest years are being reopened. Explorers are planning new expeditions to northern regions, believing the reduced sea ice will make travel easier. Your grandfather wrote extensively about how the disappearance of sunspots seemed connected to social problems like famine, disease, and political unrest. Now you're seeing the reverse. As sunspots return and weather improves, societies seem more stable and prosperous. Wars over scarce resources are becoming less common, and populations are beginning to grow again. Reading your grandfather's journals about the early years of sunspot observations makes you realize how extraordinary the past 70 years have been. He described a sun that was constantly changing, with new spots appearing and disappearing in cycles. That dynamic, active sun is finally returning, and each day brings new activity to observe and record. You've started teaching your own son, Johannes, named after his great-grandfather, how to use the telescope and record observations. At 12 years old, he's seeing an active sun that previous generations took for granted. You make sure to tell him stories about the quiet decades, so he'll understand that what seems normal to him was actually quite unusual. The scientific community is buzzing with theories about why the sun went quiet for so long, and why it's becoming active again. Some believe the sun has natural cycles that last decades or centuries. Others think external forces might influence solar activity. You contribute your grandfather's detailed records to these discussions, providing crucial data about the transition from active to quiet and back to active. The return of regular sunspot activity has validated your grandfather's life work. For decades, people questioned whether his early observations of numerous sunspots were accurate. Some suggested that primitive telescopes might have created false images. But now, as spots return in numbers similar to what he recorded in the early 1600s, his careful documentation is recognized as invaluable scientific evidence. As you watch the sun through your telescope today, counting 9 distinct sunspot groups, more than you've ever seen at once, you feel connected to both your grandfather's past observations and to future scientists who will continue this work. The sun's long sleep is ending, and with it, the coldest period of the Little Ice Age is beginning to fade. The Maunder Minimum, as future scientists will call it, lasted about 70 years and coincided with some of the worst weather in European history. Your family's 3 generations of careful observations have documented one of the most important connections between solar activity and Earth's climate. The sun that once went quiet has awakened, and the world is warming with it. You're a merchant named Heinrich, living in the trading city of Bruges in Belgium in the year 1650. Your family has been in the trading business for 6 generations. buying goods from one country and selling them in another. Your great-great-grandfather made his fortune during the warm centuries, when trade flowed easily across Europe. But now, everything is changing, and you're watching the medieval world of commerce slowly freeze to death. Your warehouse sits mostly empty these days. Where it once held Spanish wool, English grain, Italian silk, and Baltic amber, now you have just a few barrels of salted fish and some locally made cloth. The great trade routes that made your family wealthy have become too dangerous, too expensive, or simply impossible to travel. This morning, you receive a letter that makes your heart sink. Your trading partner in Stockholm writes that the Baltic Sea has been frozen for 3 months now, and none of the merchant ships can get through. The harbour where dozens of vessels used to dock all winter is now just a field of solid ice. Even the icebreaker ships can't make it through the thick frozen layers. The roads aren't much better than the sea routes. Yesterday, a merchant who tried to bring goods from Frankfurt arrived with only half his cargo. His wagon got stuck in snowdrifts for 2 weeks, and he had to abandon some barrels to lighten the load. The horses were so weakened by the cold that one of them died before reaching Bruges. Your father used to tell stories about the golden age of trade when he was young. Back then, merchant caravans moved regularly between cities year-round. The roads were busy with traders carrying wool from England, spices from Venice, furs from Russia, and wine from France. Markets in every town were full of goods from distant lands, and people grew wealthy by moving merchandise from place to place. But that world is disappearing before your eyes. The Little Ice Age has made travelling so difficult and dangerous that many trade routes have been abandoned completely. Some roads that were once busy highways now see only a few local farmers travelling between nearby villages. Your friend Klaus, whose family traded in grain from Eastern Europe, has given up entirely. There's no point, he told you last week. The growing seasons are so short that there's barely enough grain to feed the people who grow it. Nobody has surplus to trade anymore. Klaus has turned his warehouse into a workshop where he makes simple furniture for local buyers. The most heartbreaking change is in the Great Market Square of Bruges itself. When your grandfather was young, this square hosted one of the most important markets in Northern Europe. Merchants from dozens of countries would gather here to buy and sell everything from precious metals to exotic spices. Now, the weekly market has maybe 20 stalls, mostly selling local produce and basic necessities. You still try to maintain some trading connections, but it's becoming harder each year. A shipment of wool from England that used to take 2 weeks to arrange now takes months. Ships have to wait for favourable weather that may not come at all. When goods do arrive, they often cost 3 times what they did in the past because of all the delays and difficulties. The banking families that used to finance long-distance trade are pulling their money out of commerce. The Medici Bank, which once had offices in every major trading city, has closed most of their branches. Too risky, their agent in Bruges explained. Too many ships lost to storms, too many caravans frozen on mountain passes. Some of the smaller trading cities have become ghost towns. You passed through Novgorod 2 years ago, a city that used to be a major stop on the route between Western Europe and Russia. Half the buildings were empty, and grass was growing in streets that once bustled with merchants and their goods. The few people left were subsistence farmers, trying to grow enough food to survive. Your wife Maria worries about your insistence on continuing the family trading business. Why don't you do what Klaus did? She asks. Find something useful to make and sell locally. Stop dreaming about distant markets that don't exist anymore. She makes sense, but giving up feels like betraying all the generations of your family who built this business. The Guild of Merchants in Bruges holds fewer meetings now because there are so few active traders left. When you do meet, the conversation is always the same. Which routes are still passable? Which cities still have goods to trade? Which harbours aren't frozen shut? The old men tell stories about the busy trade routes of their youth like legends from a different world. One of the strangest effects of the dying trade networks is how isolated different regions have become. You used to know the price of wheat in England, the availability of silver in Germany, and the demand for spices in Italy. Now, you barely know what's happening in the next country over. Each region has become like an island, cut off from the larger world of commerce. The few merchants who still attempt long-distance trading have to be incredibly brave and creative. They travel in larger groups for protection, carry weapons to defend against desperate brigands, and take routes that avoid the worst mountain passes and frozen harbours. But even with all these precautions, many never return from their journeys. What saddens you most is knowing that you might be witnessing the end of an entire way of life. The medieval trading networks that connected Europe, Asia, and Africa took centuries to develop. They created prosperity, spread knowledge, and connected different cultures. But the Little Ice Age is slowly strangling these connections, forcing people to retreat into isolated, self-sufficient communities. Tonight, you sit in your mostly empty warehouse, looking at the account books that record the slow decline of your family's business. Each year shows fewer transactions, smaller profits, and greater risks. You're beginning to understand that the age of great merchants and busy trade routes might be ending, at least for your lifetime. 10 years have passed, and it's now 1660. The trading networks that once connected Europe have collapsed so completely that you barely recognize the continent you grew up knowing. Your merchant business has finally failed entirely, and you've converted your warehouse into a small brewery, making beer for the people of Bruges from local barley and hops. Your son Jakob, now 25, has never known the world of international trade that shaped your life. To him, goods from distant countries are as rare and magical as unicorns. When he was 15, you showed him a piece of Chinese silk that had been in your warehouse for years. Something you couldn't sell because no customers had money for luxuries. He touched it like it was a holy relic. The city of Bruges, which once competed with Venice as a center of world trade, has become increasingly isolated. The harbor that used to welcome ships from England, Spain, and Scandinavia now sees only small fishing boats and occasional coastal vessels from nearby ports. The grand buildings that once housed foreign merchants' offices stand empty, their windows boarded up. News from other parts of Europe arrives slowly and unreliably. You recently heard that Vienna, once a major trading center, has been cut off from overland routes for 2 years because mountain passes remain blocked by snow and ice even in summer. Venice, your old trading rival, reportedly can't get goods through the Alpine passes and is struggling to maintain even basic trade with Northern Europe. The most shocking news came from a traveller who passed through last month. He claimed that the Great Silk Road trading routes across Asia have been abandoned almost entirely. The cities that once grew rich from trade between Europe and China are now empty or have turned to local farming just to survive. Samarkand, Constantinople, and other famous trading centres are mere shadows of their former selves. Your brother Otto, who moved to London 20 years ago to establish a trading office there, writes desperate letters begging you to send him, even basic goods. The Thames has been frozen for 3 months, his last letter said. Ships can't reach London from anywhere. We're running out of coal, and food prices are higher than anyone alive can remember. The transformation of society around you has been remarkable to witness. Bruges has become almost entirely self-sufficient out of necessity. People who once bought bread from bakers now grow their own grain. Families who used to purchase cloth from your warehouse now spin wool and weave their own fabric. Everyone has learned skills their grandparents knew, but their parents had forgotten during the prosperous trading years. The guild system, which once organized craftsmen who made goods for export, has completely changed. Now the guilds focus on producing everything the city needs locally, from tools to clothing to food. The goldsmith who used to create ornate pieces for wealthy foreign customers now makes simple spoons and farming tools for local families. Jakob has joined the Brewers Guild, learning a trade that makes sense in this new world. Beer can be made from local ingredients and doesn't spoil during transport like wine or other goods. Local production for local consumption has become the new economy, replacing the complex networks of international trade that sustained medieval Europe for centuries. Sometimes you meet other former merchants in the taverns of Bruges, and you, all tell the same stories. Stories about the days when caravans of 30 wagons would arrive from Germany carrying leather goods, metal tools, and preserved meats. Stories about ships from England unloading bales of wool that would be turned into fine cloth and sold across Europe. Stories that sound like fairy tales to anyone under 40 years old. The strangest thing is how different languages are becoming isolated again. During the height of medieval trade, merchants like you spoke several languages and could conduct business from London to Moscow. But with no reason to communicate across borders, fewer people learn foreign languages. Your grandson has never heard spoken English or French, though these were common tongues in Bruges when you were young. Food has become much more basic and local. The spices that once flowed through Bruges from the East Indies are just memories. Now, people cook with local herbs and whatever salt they can get from nearby coastal saltworks. Meals that once included exotic ingredients from around the world now consist of whatever can be grown or raised within a day's walk of the city. The banking system that supported international trade has collapsed along with the trade routes. The Medici Bank completely withdrew from Northern Europe 5 years ago. The German banking houses have closed most of their foreign offices. Without reliable ways to move money across borders, even the merchants who want to attempt long-distance trade can't arrange financing. You've noticed that knowledge itself is becoming more local and isolated. Universities that once attracted students from across Europe now mainly serve their immediate regions. Books and ideas that used to spread quickly through trading networks now take years to travel from one country to another, if they travel at all. The worst part is realizing that this isolation is breeding suspicion and hostility between regions that were once trading partners. Countries that used to depend on each other for goods now view their neighbors as potential threats. Without the bonds of commerce to hold them together, European societies are turning inward and becoming more aggressive toward outsiders. Your wife Maria has adapted better to this new world than you have. She's learned to preserve food, make soap, brew medicines from local plants, and manage a household that produces almost everything it needs. This is how my grandmother lived, she says. Maybe it's better to depend on ourselves instead of trusting strangers from far away. As winter approaches again, you look around Bruges and realize that it has become a completely different city than the one where you grew up. The cosmopolitan trading center that connected Northern Europe to the wider world has become a provincial town focused entirely on local survival. The Little Ice Age hasn't just frozen the trade routes, it has frozen the connections between peoples and cultures that made medieval Europe possible. It's 1680, and you're now an old man of 75, sitting in your small brewery watching. Your grandson Peter learn the trade. Jacob, your son, runs the business now, and Peter is learning that beer making is about the only reliable trade left in this frozen world. But sometimes, usually on cold winter evenings like this one, you find yourself telling Peter stories about the old days that sound so impossible he thinks you're making them up. "Tell me again about the spice merchants, Grandpapa," Peter says as he helps you clean the brewing equipment. He's 20 years old and has lived his entire life in a world where the most exotic thing in the market is honey from a farm 5 miles away. To him, tales of caravans carrying pepper and cinnamon from India seem like stories from a book of fairy tales. You show him the little leather pouch you still keep hidden in your desk, the last bit of black pepper from your trading days. Peter sniffs it carefully and makes a face. He can't understand why people once paid enormous amounts of money for this tiny black seed that tastes so strange. In his world, food is seasoned with local herbs like sage and thyme, if it's seasoned at all. The city of Bruges has transformed completely during Peter's lifetime. The great market square where merchants from 20 countries once displayed their goods now hosts a small farmers' market twice a week. Local women sell vegetables from their gardens, men offer tools they've made in their workshops, and children trade small toys carved from wood. It's peaceful and orderly, but it's nothing like the chaotic, exciting, international marketplace you remember. Jacob has adapted well to this new world of local trade. He's expanded the brewery and now makes 3 different types of beer that He sells to taverns throughout the region. He also trades beer for other necessities, grain from farmers, cloth from weavers, metalwork from blacksmiths. It's a simple economy based on bartering goods that everyone can see and understand. But you miss the complexity and excitement of the old trading networks. You miss receiving letters from merchants in distant cities reporting on harvests, wars, prices, and opportunities. You miss the thrill of buying a shipment of goods in one country and selling them for a profit in another. Most of all, you miss feeling connected to a wider world that stretched from England to Russia to Africa. The isolation has affected people's minds as well as their trade. Peter has never met anyone from more than 50 miles away from Bruges. He's never heard a foreign language spoken by a native speaker. The closest he's come to seeing exotic goods is looking at the few remaining pieces in the city's tiny museum. Things like Chinese porcelain and Indian textiles that were donated by former merchants like you. Sometimes foreign visitors still pass through Bruges, and when they do, they become the center of attention for weeks. Last year, a man claiming to be from Italy stayed at the inn for 3 days. Everyone in the city came to stare at him, to hear him speak his strange language, and to ask him questions about the world beyond our region. He seemed as amazed by our provincial life as we were by his stories of distant lands. The younger generation has developed different values entirely. Where you once prized goods from far away as signs of wealth and sophistication, Peter and his friends take pride in things made locally by people they know. They prefer bread baked by the neighbor, clothes sewn by the town's weaver, and tools forged by the local blacksmith. Global trade seems not just impossible to them, but somehow morally wrong. The few books and maps in Bruges that show the wider world are becoming increasingly inaccurate as information stops flowing between regions. A map showing trade routes that your father drew 50 years ago now marks dozens of cities and routes that no longer exist. When you point to places like Novgorod, Samarkand, or Kaffa, Peter nods politely but clearly doesn't believe these places are real. You've noticed that even the concept of different countries has become fuzzy for young people. Since no goods, people, or information move between regions, France might as well be on the moon as far as Peter is concerned. He understands that it exists somewhere to the south, but he has no clear idea of what French people are like, what they eat, how they live, or why anyone should care about them. The most painful loss is language itself. You still remember enough Italian to chat with visiting merchants. You can read Latin, and you once spoke passable Russian and English. But Peter speaks only the local dialect of Flemish and a bit of formal Dutch. The rich linguistic diversity that came from constant contact between peoples has been replaced by profound monolingual isolation. You've started writing down your memories of the great trading days, partly to preserve them, and partly because you don't trust your aging memory to keep them accurate. You write about the smell of spices in the warehouse, the excitement of receiving news from distant partners, the satisfaction of completing a successful trade that involved merchants from 5 different countries. Your old friend Klaus, one of the few surviving merchants from the glory days, visits you every Sunday. Together, you remember the sounds of the old marketplace, dozens of languages being spoken simultaneously, the creak of wagon wheels arriving from long journeys, the shouts of laborers unloading exotic goods from distant lands. These quiet Sunday conversations are the only times the old world feels real to either of you. As you look out the brewery window at the narrow, quiet streets of modern Bruges, you realize that you've witnessed the end of an entire age of human history. The medieval world of connected markets, international trade, and cultural exchange has simply frozen to death. The Little Ice Age didn't just change the weather, it shattered the bonds that held the medieval world together. Peter will live his whole life in this isolated local world. His children will grow up without any memory of a time when European cities were connected by trade routes stretching across continents. The idea that a person in Bruges could buy goods made in China or India will seem as fantastical to them as magic spells. The age of medieval globalization is over, and its memory will soon be all that remains. You're a young farmer named Willem living in the Netherlands in the year 1730. Your grandfather fought constantly against the cold, failed. Harvests, frozen canals, and endless struggles to keep crops alive in the brutal weather of the Little Ice Age. But this year, something different is happening. Spring arrived 2 weeks earlier than usual, and the warmth has stayed longer than anyone expects. Your grandfather died 5 years ago, but he spent his final years talking constantly about how different the weather used to be. When I was young, he'd say, winter would grip the land until April, sometimes May. We never knew if the crops would survive until harvest. But this year, you planted your wheat in March, and it's already growing thick and green in fields that used to stay frozen until late spring. The older people in your village are excited but cautious about the changing weather. They remember too many years of disappointment, too many springs that promised warmth only to be killed by late frosts. Don't get your hopes up, warns your neighbour Peter, who lost 3 harvests in a row during the 1690s. The cold always comes back when you least expect it. But you're young and optimistic. You've expanded your farm this year, planting crops in fields that your father said were too risky because of frost. You've planted not just wheat and barley, but also vegetables that need longer growing seasons. Turnips, carrots, and even some apple trees that wouldn't have survived in your grandfather's time. The most obvious sign of changing weather is the canals. For decades, they froze solid every winter, and people held markets and festivals on the ice. But this winter, the ice was thin and broke up early. Canal boats were moving again by February, carrying goods between towns that had been isolated for months each year during the coldest decades. Your wife Anna is pregnant with your first child, and you're filled with hope that this baby will grow up in a warmer, more prosperous world than the one your grandfather knew. You've heard stories from your father about children who died during the worst winters of the Little Ice Age, not from disease, but from the cold itself in houses that couldn't stay warm enough no matter how much fuel was burned. The local priest, Father Hendrik, has changed his sermons lately. Instead of praying for God to end the punishment of cold weather, he now thanks God for blessing the community with warmer seasons. Some older parishioners grumble that it's too early to celebrate, but the young families in the congregation are openly joyful about the improved conditions. One thing that amazes you is how quickly nature responds to the warmer weather. Birds that your grandfather said had disappeared from the area are returning. Last week, you saw a type of butterfly that the old folks claimed hadn't been seen for 50 years. Wild plants that only grew in the south are starting to appear in your region. But there are also challenges with the warming. The sudden melting of ice dams has caused flooding in some areas. Rivers that were small streams during the coldest years are now flowing so strongly that they've washed out bridges and flooded low-lying farms. Change, you're learning, brings both opportunities and problems. Your farming techniques are different from your grandfather's because you don't have to plan for such extreme cold. He planted crops closer together to protect them from frost, and he always kept large stores of grain in case the harvest failed. You're experimenting with spacing plants farther apart and trying new varieties that need more warmth but produce bigger yields. The most exciting change is in trade and communication. Roads that were impassable during winter for decades are now open most of the year. Merchants are returning to routes they abandoned during the coldest period. Last month, you sold vegetables to a trader from Amsterdam, something that would have been impossible when transportation was so difficult and unreliable. Your younger brother Jan has decided to try growing grapes again. People laugh at him, reminding him that wine grapes haven't grown this far north in living memory. But Jan found an old book that belonged to your great-grandfather describing vineyards in this area during the 1500s. He's convinced that if the weather continues to warm, grapes might become possible again. The village has started holding outdoor markets again during winter months, something that stopped completely during the worst cold years. People come from neighbouring towns to buy and sell goods, creating a sense of community activity that your elders say reminds them of stories from the time before the Great Cold. You've noticed that the soil itself seems different. During the coldest years, the ground stayed hard and frozen so deep that it was difficult to plough even in summer. Now, The earth thaws completely and becomes rich and workable earlier in the season. You can plant crops in soil conditions that would have been impossible for your father's generation. Education is changing too. The village school, which had to close during some of the worst winter months because it was too cold for children to attend, now stays open year-round. Young people who grew up during the coldest period often couldn't read or write well because their schooling was so interrupted by weather. Your future children will have more consistent education. What you don't fully understand yet is that you're witnessing the beginning of the end of the Little Ice Age. The warming that started around 1700 will continue gradually for decades, eventually making the brutal cold of the 1600s and early 1700s seem like a nightmare from the distant past. But the world that emerges from this warming won't be the same as the medieval world that existed before the Little Ice Age began. 25 years have passed, and it's now 1755. You're middle-aged, and the warming trend has continued steadily. Your son Thomas, born during those first promising warm years, has grown up in a world his great-grandfather couldn't have imagined. But as the weather improved, you've realized that the world emerging from the Little Ice Age is fundamentally different from the medieval world that existed before the cold began. Your farm now produces twice as much grain as your grandfather's farm ever did, but not because of the warming alone. During the coldest years, people developed new farming techniques to cope with harsh conditions. They learned to use different fertilizers, to rotate crops more effectively, and to breed hardier varieties of plants. Now that the weather is warmer, these improved methods produce amazing harvests. Thomas has learned to read and write much better than you ever could. The long interruptions to schooling that marked your childhood are gone, but more importantly, new ideas about education have spread during the recovery years. People who survived the harsh times have a different attitude toward knowledge. They believe learning practical skills is just as important as traditional subjects. Your village has grown larger, but it's not the same kind of medieval village your grandfather knew. During the Little Ice Age, people learned to be more self-sufficient. Even though trade has resumed, families still keep larger gardens, preserve more food, and maintain skills like weaving and metalworking that they might have left to specialists in earlier times. The most obvious difference is in how people think about the future. Your grandfather's generation expected life to follow the same patterns for centuries. The same crops, the same trades, the same social structure. But people who lived through rapid climate change are more accepting of new ideas and technologies. They've seen how quickly the world can change, so they're less resistant to innovation. Anna, now in her 40s, runs a successful business selling preserved foods and medicines made from local plants. This kind of small-scale commerce by women was rare in the medieval period. But during the difficult years, everyone had to find ways to contribute to their family's survival. Now that survival is easier, many of these new social patterns have continued. The political structure of society has changed too. During the worst years of cold and famine, many noble families lost their wealth and power because their agricultural estates couldn't produce enough income. Local communities had to become more self-governing out of necessity. Even though times are better now, people are reluctant to give up the independence they gained during the difficult period. Your brother Jan's experiment with growing grapes has succeeded beyond anyone's expectations. He now produces wine that's considered quite good, and other farmers are starting to plant vineyards too. But this new wine industry uses different methods than the medieval one. Jan learned techniques from books and traveling experts, creating a more scientific approach to grape growing. Thomas works part-time as a surveyor, measuring land and making maps. This profession barely existed during the medieval period. But during the recovery from the Little Ice Age, communities need to reorganize agriculture, plan new settlements, and establish clearer property boundaries. The chaotic years taught people the importance of accurate record-keeping and systematic planning. Trade has resumed, but it operates differently than it did during the medieval period. Merchants are more cautious about long-distance ventures after so many trading networks collapsed during the cold years. Instead of the grand international commerce of the medieval period, trade now focuses on regional networks that are less likely to be disrupted by climate or political problems. The guild system that organized medieval crafts and trades never fully recovered. During the survival years, people learned multiple skills and couldn't afford to specialize as much. Now, even though specialization is possible again, craftsmen tend to be more versatile than their medieval predecessors. Your neighbor builds houses, makes furniture, and repairs wagons, work that would have been done by 3 different guilds in earlier times. Religion has changed too, though in subtle ways. Father Hendrik's sermons focus more on gratitude and adaptation than on the unchanging order of medieval theology. People who survive dramatic climate change are more likely to see God's plan as something that evolves over time rather than as an eternal, fixed structure. The church is still central to community life, but it's more flexible in its approach. You've noticed that young people like Thomas are more curious about other parts of the world than previous generations were. The isolation caused by the Little Ice Age made people appreciate contact with other regions. When traders arrive from distant places, they're welcomed not just for their goods, but for their news and different perspectives. The most significant change is in how people view technology and innovation. Your grandfather's generation saw new methods as dangerous departures from tried and tested ways. But people who lived through crisis learned to adopt whatever worked, whether it was traditional or innovative. Thomas routinely uses new varieties of seeds, new tools, and new techniques that his great-grandfather would have viewed with suspicion. Cities are growing again, but they're different from medieval cities. Urban areas that survived the Little Ice Age had to become more self-sufficient, with residents growing food within city walls and developing local industries. Even as trade resumes, these cities maintain their diversified economies rather than depending entirely on commerce and specialized crafts. The social hierarchy that defined medieval society has been permanently altered. Noble families that lost power during the difficult years haven't been able to fully regain their status. Merchant families that adapted successfully to the new conditions have gained influence. A new class of educated professionals like Thomas has emerged. People whose skills in planning, organizing, and problem-solving make them valuable to communities. What you're witnessing is not just the end of the Little Ice Age, but the end of the medieval period itself. The world that emerges from the warming won't return to medieval patterns of life, law, and society. Instead, the experiences of surviving climate change have created the foundation for a new kind of European civilization, one that will eventually become the modern world. It's 1780, and you're now an old man of 75, watching your grandson. Peter learned to manage the farm that has been in your family for generations. The world Peter is inheriting is nothing like the medieval world your grandfather knew, and it's profoundly different, even from the harsh world of the Little Ice Age that shaped your youth. As you sit in your comfortable house, warmed by an efficient, new stove design, you reflect on how completely European civilization has transformed. The weather is now consistently warmer than it was during your childhood, and farming has become easier than your grandfather could have imagined. But what surprises you most is how people have used the better weather to build something entirely new, rather than simply returning to old ways of life. Peter uses farming techniques that combine ancient wisdom with innovations developed during the difficult centuries. Your village has grown into a small town of over 800 people, with trade workshops, a proper school that operates year-round, and even a small lending library. But unlike a medieval town, it doesn't depend on a lord or guild system for organization. Instead, the community governs itself through elected councils, a system that developed during the crisis years when formal authority often collapsed. Thomas, your son, now runs a business that would have been impossible in the medieval world. He travels throughout the region as a consultant, helping communities plan new settlements, organize agriculture, and solve engineering problems. During the Little Ice Age, communities had to become expert at adapting quickly to changing conditions. Now, Thomas sells this expertise to places that want to improve their lives. The most remarkable change is in how people think about knowledge and learning. Peter can read and write better than any noble in your grandfather's time. He subscribes to printed newsletters that share information about new farming techniques, weather patterns, and political events throughout Europe. The idea that ordinary people should have access to education and information was born from the survival needs of the difficult centuries. Your great-grandson, Johann, who is 12 years old, attends a school that teaches not just reading and religion, but also mathematics, natural philosophy, and practical skills like engineering and accounting. During the medieval period, such education was reserved for a tiny elite. But communities that survived the Little Ice Age learned that everyone benefits when more people have useful knowledge. Trade networks have rebuilt themselves, but they operate on different principles than medieval commerce. Instead of seeking rare and exotic goods to sell at high prices, merchants now focus on improving the flow of useful items, better tools, new crop varieties, efficient manufacturing techniques. The grand trading houses of the medieval period have been replaced by networks of smaller businesses that are less vulnerable to disruption. Anna, now in her 60s, has become a minor local celebrity for her knowledge of food preservation and herbal medicine. During the difficult years, every family had to master these skills to survive. Now that survival is no longer the primary concern, people like Anna have become recognized experts whose knowledge is valued and sought after throughout the region. The political structure of Europe has been permanently altered. Many of the noble families that dominated medieval society lost their power during the agricultural crises of the Little Ice Age. The communities that survived were often the ones that developed more democratic decision-making processes. While kings and princes still exist, real power now lies with merchants, landowners, and educated professionals. What strikes you most is how much more connected the world has become. Even compared to the medieval period, letters and printed materials move between regions regularly. Ideas and innovations spread quickly through networks that developed during the recovery years. Peter knows about farming improvements developed in France, manufacturing techniques from England, and political events in distant countries. The religious life of your community has evolved too. While Christianity remains central, the church has adapted to serve people who live through dramatic changes and learn to question traditional authorities. Sermons focus more on practical ethics and community responsibility than on abstract theology. The priest is expected to be educated about natural philosophy and current events, not just religious doctrine. Johann represents a generation that takes technological innovation for granted. He's learning to use mechanical devices that help with farming and manufacturing, and he expects that new improvements will continue to be developed throughout his lifetime. This attitude toward progress would have been impossible in the medieval world, where people expected life to remain essentially unchanged for centuries. Looking around your prosperous farm and thriving community, you realize that the Little Ice Age, despite all the suffering it caused, may have been necessary to break Europe out of medieval patterns that had become rigid and limiting. The crisis forced people to develop new skills, new social organizations, and new ways of thinking that have made possible this more prosperous and flexible society. The great irony is that the world emerging from the warming is in many ways more prosperous, more educated, and more equitable than the medieval world that preceded the cold. The harsh centuries taught Europeans to value practical knowledge, community cooperation, and adaptability, lessons that have made them better at taking advantage of improved conditions. As you watch Peter showing Johann how to test soil quality, using methods that combine traditional farming wisdom with scientific principles developed during the recovery period, you understand that you've witnessed the birth of the modern world. The medieval period didn't just end with the return of warm weather. It ended when people learned that human societies, like climate, can change dramatically, and that such changes can lead to better ways of living. The Little Ice Age destroyed medieval civilization, but from its ashes arose something new. A European society based on innovation, education, and adaptability, rather than tradition, hierarchy, and unchanging patterns. The world that Peter and Johann will build will transform into what future historians will call the Enlightenment, then the Industrial Revolution, and eventually the Modern Age. Medieval Europe died during the Little Ice Age, but what replaced? It was far more dynamic and capable than what had come before. The cold that seemed like an ending was actually a beginning, the beginning of the modern world.